Hello everyone and welcome back to Haunting Whispers. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Story. The previous owner of my house was deathly afraid of meat. The house was beautiful. It was like a dream. 2 stories, 2 bathrooms, 2 beds. The living room dropped down like in the 70s, and the kitchen was complete with an island and a beautiful view of the garden and a large, towering apple tree. There was even some decor left by the previous residents. Little bird feeders, a stone Buddha by the front step, a tree of life tapestry hanging in the living room. The realtor had told my parents the previous resident wouldn't be needing these things back, but she would remove them before we moved in, but my parents told her not to. It made the space feel cozy and lived in. We moved in at the beginning of summer, so I didn't have to worry about school for a while. It was nice to have no additional stress, but it made me sad to have those months free without much opportunity to see my friends. I found myself worrying about what they were doing, if they were having more fun without me, if they'd already forgotten I existed. It didn't take long for me to realize moving was lonely. I spent my summer in the garden, pretending I was a forlorn maiden, cast away from everything she knows. I lay in the cool dirt beneath the apple tree, watching the leaves flutter in the warm breeze. Sometimes I would even eat an apple, but they were always a bit too bitter for my taste. I would wonder about the sliver in the wood, like someone had hacked at it with an axe, then gave up. Who would try and chop down such a beautiful thing? That apple tree became a sort of sanctuary. The shade protected me from the blazing sun on the hotter days, and the trunk became an incredibly comfortable backrest to lean back on and read. One day, while I was doing just that, something blew up against my leg. A dirty, stained piece of paper. I set my book down and picked it up, curious. I scanned it quickly. It looked like a letter, from what I could make out, but it cut off at the end, and there was no backside. I shifted from my spot against the tree, digging my fingers into the soft dirt and searching around. I thought that if this letter had been here, maybe, just maybe, the rest were too. I was desperate for excitement at that point, and I wasn't beyond getting my hands dirty to find some. Sure enough, soon my fingers were prying at dampened notebook paper, carefully edging it out of the soil. I think I found most of them just searching in the dirt. They weren't buried very deep. As soon as I finished reading those letters, I went to find my parents, heaving. We left that house, and we never came back. I'll do my best to relay to you what the letters said, at least what I could read of it. Dear Sylvia, I miss you the worst in summer. The winter here is cold and unforgiving, but the summer is worse. I cannot even bring myself to leave the house anymore. I fear some days that death follows me, like a stray dog nipping at my heel. Now that you and Elsie are gone from my life, I have nothing left to run from. How could I be meant to stay here when you were not? Even so, I feel very strongly that dying now would be a betrayal to you, no matter how much I would love to join you, wherever you are. My days are lonely and plain now. I eat nothing but what I can take from the garden. Thank you for my nourishment and my survival, my dear wife. There isn't much flavor to my food without the smell of you cooking it in the kitchen. I think often of my time as a butcher. I used to be happy with that kind of work, but now it only disgusts me. The thought of slicing through meat that was once a living creature, nearly brings me to tears. Some nights, when I close my eyes, all I can see is muscles twitching. It haunts me in your absence. I swear, Sylvia, I will never consume that stuff again. The apple tree is the only piece of you I have left. The only living piece. I could go catatonic for hours, just watching it sway. When I see that tree, I feel that you're nearby. I miss you. Dear Sylvia, yesterday I went to sit under our tree. It pains me that when you were alive, I didn't spend much time in our garden. Perhaps I had old hermit in my blood even then. I preferred to watch you from the kitchen, admiring your gardening prowess from a distance. Perhaps that makes me a bad husband, but I think you like that about me. How I always gave you enough space. It's nice out here, very peaceful. The fresh air feels like you touching me. I could have sworn I could hear Elsie's laughter in the breeze. I noticed something strange. as I sat against the trunk, enjoying the sunshine on my skin. It felt like the tree moved against my back, almost as if it were squirming. Perhaps my mind is not what it used to be, but perhaps it was you. If it was you, thank you. I hope you'll reach out again. That night, I had a very hard time falling asleep. No matter what I did, I could not feel comfortable. My bed felt wrong, felt lumpy and strange, as if it were not made for me. I gave up and went to our kitchen, and I watched the tree through the window until my eyes grew heavy. It was so beautiful in the moonlight, glowing gently, drawing the eye. It was so quiet, so dignified. It made me feel uneasy, but in a comforting way, as odd as that may sound. When I got back to bed, it didn't feel wrong anymore, and I was finally able to rest. Our dear Sylvia, these days, all I find myself doing is wandering the house, reminiscing. I don't dare move or change anything. I want to preserve everything just the way you left it. Our house is covered in little trinkets, hippie things that I don't entirely understand. You always had such an earthly style. Some of it I don't care for. It simply isn't my cup of tea. But I never would have told you that. I would never want to step on your toes. It's apple season again. I remember watching you and Elsie climb our tree, shrieking and laughing uproariously as you hung from the branches like monkeys. Elsie? My little monkey. I know she never cared for that nickname when I called her it, but it stuck. You were such a good mother, Sylvia. I hope you knew I knew that. I used to love apple season. I loved watching you pick them, dropping the ripe ones into wicker baskets in the grass, and a couple of days later, the entire house would smell of pie, sweet cinnamon and sugar, and it would linger for days, even all the way up in the attic. This is something I miss dearly. Please come back, Sylvia, and bake one last apple pie. Our dear Sylvia, today I went out to pick apples. I thought maybe I could take a crack at your old apple pie recipe, perhaps treat myself to something besides wilted vegetables. However, something very strange and disturbing happened to me. I was collecting the ones that looked the ripest. I am not the most well-versed in things like this, but I can make an educated guess. I found one that looked so perfect. It was red and shiny, not a scratch on it or a single wormhole, which felt lucky. I went to take a bite, and what I found caused me to vomit into the grass. Inside of the apple was meat. Raw meat. It was not quite the kind of meat I used to butcher, although it twitched as such. I could see white muscles and tendon. It oozed with pink plasma where my teeth had parted the skin. It tasted metallic and rotten on my tongue. The flavor still hasn't passed. I cut open every single apple I had picked. The tree seemed to shudder. They were all like that, made of meat, some entirely, and some as if a rot was spreading over them. I can't help but wonder how long it has been this way. I feel unnerved. I feel that I can't trust my brain, my vision, or my taste buds. I feel I may vomit again. I do not know if what I experienced is real, but if it was, I do not know what to do. It is unholy, what I have experienced. Tonight, I will pray. Our dear Sylvia, today, someone knocked on the door. I was still feeling shaken up and disoriented, so this caused my nerves to be completely shot. I do not enjoy interacting with strangers, or anyone for that matter. It was a man, and he was carrying a box. He asked me for you and for Elsie. I told this man that you had not lived here for a while. He seemed confused, so I clarified that I was your husband and Elsie was my daughter, and you had both passed away in a tragic accident. That caused him to look even more confused. Forgive me, but I felt defensive and uncomfortable. I figured maybe this man looked so confused because I am old, and you were younger. Oh, how I wish I could rid this planet of all judgment. This man seemed as if he wanted to say something, but he didn't. He left then. He did not give me the box, which I assume was meant for you. Perhaps he was a coworker of yours, or an old friend, or maybe even just a mailman. I feel sorry that he had to hear the news from me, even despite my disdain. I cried today. I didn't dare go back out to the tree, but I wanted to. I feel as if I may be losing my mind. That interaction with that man at the door made me feel unnerved. I wish he had not come. I only wish to be with you again. My bed feels strange and alien. It feels too soft, and I swear something smells rotten. Perhaps an animal has gotten trapped in the walls and died. I cannot sleep. Our dear Sylvia, the smell of rot has become unbearable. I cannot live this way. When I sleep what you could barely call sleep, I see you. I dream of that first day I saw you and my daughter climbing that tree in your garden, how I watched from the street. I watched you climb and play and laugh, and you looked so happy, so holy. I saw that underneath this happiness was a lonely woman. I was drawn to you as if to a flame, the only warmth in a cold, barren life. I was drawn to you so quickly, and I knew you were all that was right, and I only wanted you, and I only wanted our daughter. It was you or nothing at all. You or the cold. And then these dreams twist and turn into nightmares, and I'm brought back to the day of your death. How you knew you would leave me before I did, and you looked at me with tears in your beautiful brown eyes. All I pray for is a chance to go back, although I know it isn't possible. I know if I could go back, something would be different. I could save you from yourself and Elsie, too. You wouldn't have to die. The smell of rot has become unbearable. I am too afraid to look out the window and see the tree. I am too afraid to see it moving. Something is alive in that tree. I feel it in my bones. It is watching me. I fear it is not just the tree that is alive. Our dear Sylvia, I have ripped apart our bed. Forgive me. I couldn't bear it. All I have found is more meat. It throbs and stinks. I have been sleeping on top of sopping, rotting flesh. I have destroyed our beautiful home. I have ripped apart the sofas and the carpet, and I have smashed the plates, and all I have found is flesh. Flesh and cracking bone. It is alive. It is all alive and moving. It wishes to swallow me. I am being condemned. I am sorry, Sylvia. I'm sorry Elsie found me in the attic that day. I'm sorry you were so afraid. If only you had known I only had good in my heart and love for you. If only I could sleep above you and listen to you snore once more. If only I could watch you one more time out of your kitchen window in the summer, you with our daughter, so oblivious, glowing with ignorant joy. I could have made you happy in that way and more. I loved you, Sylvia, and you loved me. I remember how we fought, a few days after I told you you couldn't leave until we worked everything out. How you called me sick. If I am the one who is sick, why am I the one still breathing? It is all made of meat. It sickens me. It makes me want to scream and vomit and bash my head into the wall. It is all wrong. It is all rot. I can't help but feel that you're doing this to me on purpose. Do you want me to join you so badly that you would haunt my every waking hour? I hear sirens now. The blue and red lights flash against the throbbing crimson walls. They twitch with glee at my suffering, at my terror. I will go to the garden with my axe, the last thing you saw with mortal eyes. I will chop down our tree, and I know what I will find inside. I will find meat. I will bury these letters for you in the dirt above your head, and I will chop it down so that you cannot haunt me any longer. And if they try and stop me, I will take them with me. They will not take my wife and my daughter from me again, nor me away from them. That was the trouble in the first place. I will see you soon, my dear. R. But if you think that was terrifying, wait until you hear the next tale. Every photo I took ended in tragedy. It was the early 2010s when I found my father's camera, a relic from another era, one of his countless forgotten things confined to the attic after his passing. In life, he had this obsession with it, not like someone obsessed with photography, but something deeper, stranger. It was like the camera had consumed him, his hands bound to it as if it were one with his flesh, and in most of my memories of him, his face is hidden behind it. He existed only beyond its lens, like the world didn't matter unless he was seeing it through that damned viewfinder. Rediscovering the camera felt like a chance to reconnect with him after all of these years. I was 17 at the time, and I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little excited to find it. It was an old QuickTake 100, clunky and covered in dust. The thing looked ancient by tech standards, and holding it, it felt heavy. Not just in weight, but in something else. Almost like I could feel my dad's attachment to it, his love for it, tangible in plastic and metal. And for a moment, I thought maybe I could see what he saw. Maybe I could understand why it seemed to matter more than we did. This was his totem, his artistic lifeline. And perhaps knowing this, I should have left it undisturbed. I should have left it there, buried beneath old furniture and junk. But I didn't. The first incident, it all happened so fast. I had just wiped the dust off the lens, standing by my bedroom window. My best friend, Charlie, he lived across the street, and I remember seeing him in his room, just a blur of motion through the glass. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the neighborhood, and it seemed like a good time to test the camera, to see if it even worked after all these years. And so I lifted the viewfinder to my eye, lining up the shot, and pressed the button on its side. The flash went off, bright and glaring, and then chaos. A deafening boom rocked the air, shaking my house as if we were caught in an earthquake. I stumbled back to my bed, hands covering my face as a burst of radiant light seared through my window. My heart raced as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. I smelled smoke. It assaulted my nostrils almost instantly, and the scent of burning wood, it was strong. So I pushed myself off my bed, staggering over to the window, and that's when I saw it. Charlie's house was gone. Where his house once stood was nothing but a hellish crater, flames licking up into the sky. The remains of his home were scattered in all directions, as if something had reached down from the heavens and ripped it apart. The noise, the smoke, the screams, they were everywhere. My mom rushed outside. I heard the door hit the wall as she tore it open, pulling my sister with her, both of them in hysterics. But I couldn't move. I just stood there, staring at the chaos, paralyzed by the shock of what I'd just witnessed. I remained frozen until the fire engines arrived, beginning their futile attempt to quell the inferno. But God, how it burned. It burned, and it burned, and it burned, the flames raging on into the night, glowing like a second sun in the darkness. Charlie and his family, incinerated in an instant. Gone, just like that, wiped off the face of the earth. They never stood a chance. A few weeks later, the official report blamed it on a gas leak, and I believed it at first. I had to. What else could explain something so sudden, so violent? But I was naive. I had no idea at the time. It was just a freak accident. I had just happened to capture it. A year or so later, I found the camera again. It was like it reappeared in my bedroom. Hidden in plain sight amongst the clutter, I rediscovered it whilst packing up for university. I was moving far from home, and I plugged it into the family computer, hoping to find some of my father's old photos. These cameras, apparently they can only hold about 8 photographs at a time, so I was curious to see if he'd left a few on there before his passing. But he hadn't. I discovered that quickly. The curious smile on my face fell into a frown, but there was one photo on there, a singular file in its memory. Just one horrifying photograph that made my heart stop. I opened it up, the image exploding onto my screen, and tears rolled over my cheeks. In the image, the house had been caught mid-explosion, walls buckling, windows shattering, fire erupting from the ground. I'd captured the exact moment the house was obliterated, and something about it felt wrong. Like it wasn't just a coincidence. Like I had caused it somehow, with the flick of my finger, the button akin to the trigger of a gun. Terrified, I deleted the photo. I didn't think, I just wanted it gone, away from my tear-filled eyes. But even after it was wiped, that feeling stayed. This nagging sense that the camera was more than just a piece of equipment, that it held on to things, dark things. My father had been obsessed with it for a reason, so I didn't touch the camera again for a while. But like a cursed object from an old horror movie, I couldn't shake its presence. When I left home 1 year for my final term of university, I brought it with me. I don't even know why. It just ended up in my bag, like it wanted to come along, and for months, it sat on a shelf in my dorm room, collecting dust. It stared at me from its spot, its lens like an unblinking eye, and sometimes I felt like my father was watching me through it. I swear I could see his eye in the lens from time to time, but I knew I was just being paranoid. Perhaps I'd had one too many coffees during the late-night study, so I left it alone. I let him, watch over me undisturbed, until one day, I couldn't. It was late, and I was stressed out from a final project. It was going to be making up most of my grade. I needed a distraction, so I grabbed the camera, telling myself it was harmless. I stood in front of my mirror, holding it up to my face, and for a second, I considered taking a picture of myself. My finger hovered over the button, a smile blooming on my face, but something stopped me. I felt dread. A cold wave of fear washed over me, and I remembered the explosion, the fire. Charlie. I put the camera down. I relived the explosion all over again, and for a while I was frozen to the spot. But then the next day, I took it with me to campus. I can't tell you why, but I just felt like I needed to. My friend Sarah and I were hanging out by a smoking shelter with a few other students. They were fascinated by the old camera, calling it a piece of history. They begged me to take a photo of them. Sarah and these 3 other girls I didn't know, but I was hesitant. I was shaking at just the thought of it. Every instinct screamed at me to stop, but they kept urging me on. So I agreed to it, against my better judgment. I stood up, and they moved into place behind a row of bollards, posing and pouting. It was by no means a serious photograph. Lifting the viewfinder to my eye, I struggled to still the shot, my hands still shaking with anxiety, but I calmed myself, slowing my breathing. I thought I was simply scaring myself. What happened to Charlie? That was a freak accident. There was no way this camera had any part in its doing. And so I pressed the button. I pulled the trigger. And what happened next? It was all on me. The flash went off. The world transformed into white light, and my eyes burned as if I had stared into the sun. But screaming followed. I heard bodies hitting metal, then the sound of flesh pounding the ground, bones breaking upon impact. The gargled sound of blood pooling in someone's throat, the continuous monotonous beep of a car horn. It came out of nowhere, swerving wildly down the road. I'd heard it coming, but I never foresaw this happening. The driver, a drunk student, had lost control of the wheel. The girls were thrown into the air like rag dolls, killed the moment their skin touched the bumper, but I had witnessed none of it. I'd held my eyes shut after the flash as if I knew what was coming, and instantly I regretted not trusting my gut. I knew this was going to happen. I just knew something would happen. I could feel it. But now they were dead. All 3 of them. Dead. And so too was the driver, his car wrapped around a concrete pillar, his skull crushed against the horn, the sound wailing like a scream. And I was numb. It felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The deaths, the destruction. The 2 times I used this camera, death had followed. And it wasn't a coincidence, I was certain of that. It wasn't just bad luck. This camera was the cause, the murderer, the executioner. It killed. I don't know how else to put it. And I know it sounds ridiculous, but if you held it in your hands, you would feel it too. It was more than plastic and metal, this camera. It was satanic. It was hellish. It was under the influence of evil, possessed or hexed. And I should have destroyed it before it took another life. But for some reason, perhaps it was its power, I simply couldn't. That summer, I left the camera on my desk, untouched, as if ignoring it could somehow undo the damage. But it was still there, watching me. Waiting for the day I'd pick it up again, once I convinced myself that everything was just a coincidence. That day came when winter rolled around. Enough time had passed for the fear to dull, for the memories to blur. The idea that the camera was responsible for those deaths, it seemed ridiculous. Something I'd imagined in the chaos and grief. Until one night, a sick curiosity crept in. It was late, around 3 a.m., when I gave in to the urge. My laptop was glowing in the dark, the cursor hovering over the camera's file. I'd grown fascinated with death over the summer, consuming gore videos online, each one more gruesome than the last. I told myself it was to desensitize, to numb the horror that I had witnessed, but really, I was sinking deeper into something I didn't want to understand. I wasn't proud of it, but I needed to see that photo, the one I took right before the girls died, before their souls were ripped from their bodies. I wanted to stare death in the face, to see the exact moment their lives ended, captured in stillness. And in a way, it felt like I had created my own personal snuff film. This photo could rise above what I had seen online. You probably think I'm disgusting for saying that, and you'd be right, I know it myself. And there it was, the singular photo file. It stared back at me through the screen, taunting me, daring me to open it. And so I did. I clicked, I indulged, and opened it to full screen. I gasped. The car mid-crash, the girls suspended in the air like broken marionettes. The first 2 were twisted grotesquely, limbs bent at impossible angles, skin tearing as they were ripped apart from the force. Their heads were snapped back, throats extended unnaturally, the moment of their deaths frozen forever. The 3rd girl. She hadn't yet hit the car, but the bumper was inches from her, and in that split second, she'd turned her head. She was looking right at it, right at her death, and it was devastating. I could see the fear in her eyes. But what made my stomach twist was Sarah. She was perfectly fine, still standing, hands in her pockets, staring straight at the camera, at me. Nothing was happening around her. She wasn't part of the chaos, wasn't caught in the carnage. She was just there, smiling, ready for her picture. But her eyes, God, her eyes. They burned through the screen, locked onto mine. I could feel her seeing me like she wasn't just a figure in a photograph. As if, even in death, she was still looking at me, still waiting for me to press that button again, to ignite the camera flash. My breath caught in my throat. My skin crawled. I slammed the laptop shut, yanking the camera cable out, nearly ripping it apart. My heart pounded as I stumbled out of bed, needing air, needing to get away from that photo. I rushed to the window, sucking in deep breaths as I leaned against the cold glass and stared out at the street. The house across the road was an empty lot now. It hadn't changed in years. It was a patch of blackened earth, the damage like a scar on the land's flesh, a remnant of the horror that had occurred. Just looking at it made my chest tighten, my nose tingling with the phantom smell of smoke. I couldn't escape the memory of that fire, the flames licking up into the sky, the heat against my skin. And in that moment, I made a decision. I had to get rid of the camera. Once might have been a freak accident. Twice could still be a coincidence. But 3 times, if something happened again, if another life was lost, there would be no more pretending. No more comforting myself with lies. If I took one more photo and someone else died, what would that mean? That the camera was truly cursed? That it held some evil, some power I couldn't understand? And what about my father? How did he fit into all of this? What had he seen through its lens? No, I couldn't think about that. I didn't want to. The camera had to go. It was better off gone. But I struggled to let it go. For days, the camera sat there, untouched, perched on the edge of my desk, waiting. Every time I went to throw it away, I hesitated. I couldn't explain the power it had over me. It felt like it was fighting for its survival. So it stayed there for weeks, teetering dangerously close to the edge, until one evening, after spiraling once again into another binge of gore videos, I finally built up the courage to let it go. That last video, another gruesome car crash, pushed me over the edge. It was too much. The blood, the twisted wreckage. It brought back the sound of the screams, the thud of bodies against the pavement, the horror of the police cordon that haunted me when I left campus early, unable to finish the term. I had to get rid of it, before it took another life, and I had to do it now. But when I reached for the camera, it was gone. Panic gripped me. My chest tightened, my heart racing as I began to tear apart my room. The camera had to be here. It had to be. I couldn't risk it ending up in someone else's hands. I ripped through drawers, threw clothes on the floor, overturned my bed, but the camera had simply vanished. And I knew someone had taken it. I was a fool to leave it on my desk for the taking. I bolted down the stairs, my legs shaking beneath me, startling my mother as I burst into the living room. She looked up from her glass of wine, alarmed by the terror on my face. I stammered, demanding to know if she'd seen it. The camera, the one my father had cherished. Maybe she'd put it back in the attic where it belonged. But no, of course not. Her answer knocked the breath from me, my stomach lurching. "It's with your sister," she said, so casually, so innocently. She had no idea the weight of those words, no idea of the danger. I felt the blood drain from my face, bile rising in my throat as I begged her. Where was she? Where was my sister? Her next words were worse. "She's at Sienna's house. Just down the road. They're having a party." My world collapsed. I gasped, my lungs squeezing tight as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. A cold finger of dread traced its way down my spine. I didn't think. I just ran. I tore through the front door with such force it slammed against the wall, my mother calling after me, but I couldn't stop. The night air was freezing, my breath visible in front of me as I sprinted down the street, each step heavier than the last. My lungs burned like fire, but I kept going, screaming her name into the darkness, a sense of dread building with every stride. That awful feeling, like every time before the deaths, it came back to me. The weight of impending doom settled in my gut. I could see the house now, just up ahead. My legs were shaking, cramping with pain, but I pushed through it, my heart thundering in my ears. I had to get there. I had to save her, save everyone from the damned camera. But I was too late. just seconds too late, my feet barely scraping the lawn. The sound of shattering glass pierced the night. Then came the flames. They burst outwards, consuming the house in an instant, searing my skin as I was thrown backwards by the force of the explosion. My head hit the ground, the world spinning as I struggled to focus through blurry vision. I could barely make out people running from the blaze, their bodies engulfed in flames, their clothes igniting, their flesh melting, and all I could do was sob. I had let this happen. I had let the camera be taken, let it fall into the hands of someone who had no idea what it was capable of. And now my sister was in there, turning to ash in the center of the inferno. She didn't know. She had no way of knowing. But I should have gotten there sooner. This fire, too, after a long investigation, was ruled as another gas leak, the second on our street. Another tragic accident, they said, but I knew better. It wasn't gas, nor was it an accident. It was the camera. They recovered my sister's body, but it was burned beyond recognition, along with 24 other partygoers. My mother was devastated. The whole street mourned again, but I knew it was my fault. I had let this happen. I had let it take another life, many more lives. And though the camera was destroyed in the blaze, reduced to nothing but ash along with my sister, at least I can live knowing it won't harm anyone else. But it came at a cost. It tore away a piece of my heart. And my mother, she was never the same after that day. How could she be? She'd lost everything. She barely even existed to me after my sister died. She was mourning eternally. It's all she could do. She floated through life as if she was already dead, so her passing a few years later felt like mercy. She was suffering in life. She was hardly alive, but at least she's at rest now. That leaves only me. But the camera, at least it's gone forever now. But the guilt will never leave me. And some nights I lie awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if it's all truly over. If it really died in those flames, are flames enough to extinguish such evil? But other nights, I wonder if it's simply waiting for someone else to find it, so its flash can play the executioner once again. As the shadows deepen, another story lurks in the dark, waiting to be told. Someone is watching me. I don't know where to start. I live on my family's 250-acre property. Being a farm, it's pretty open with rolling fields surrounding my home, except to the left of my house, where there's a small 2-acre woods. It took me a while to check it out, even though growing up I was always running through the woods wherever we lived. Since this particular wood's so thick, I never spent much time in it. But one day I decided to explore. I grabbed my machete, knowing it would be a slow trek, cutting down various plants and vines out of my way. I had made a complete circle around the outside of the woods, instead of going through the center, which was full of vines and poison ivy. I had almost made it back to my starting point until I was stopped in my tracks. Sitting in front of me in a small clearing was an old, dirty mattress. I remember audibly saying, "What the fuck?" when I got close enough to see. Even worse, next to the mattress were two things: an old stuffed rabbit doll and a bowl full of water. While it obviously creeped me out being in the woods alone, with nothing but a now dull machete from hacking down various plants, eventually my curiosity got the better of me. I got closer and closer, almost chuckling at my reaction to what, albeit creepy, looked abandoned. Still something seemed off, and I could feel a pit growing in my stomach. That's when I looked up. I had been so focused on the mattress itself that I didn't even notice it was pointed directly towards my house. The weeds in front of the mattress had been lightly trimmed, not enough to notice any difference against the thick backdrop of the woods, but just enough to see my home. I was feeling uneasy and decided it best not to dwell on it too long. Probably just a spot some teenagers used to hang out on an old mattress, I thought to myself, no doubt trying to ignore the multitude of questions flowing through my mind. Why would someone clear the weeds to have a direct view of my house? Why wouldn't someone throw the mattress away? Why put it in the woods right off the edge? All these questions were an obvious distraction to the thought that was slowly growing on my subconscious. Is someone watching me? By the time I got back to my house, I was almost laughing at myself for the stupidity of it. You really think you're interesting enough for someone to watch you? What are the chances someone is actually watching me? Eventually, the mattress fully left my mind while I got distracted watching TV. Still, I never felt completely comfortable knowing that old dirty mattress was just sitting in the woods next to my home. Every day when I got home from work, I would look towards the woods in passing, and each time I passed by, I got an almost uneasy feeling. Being on a farm in the middle of nowhere, it's almost pitch black at night, except for the light on my front porch that was turned on by a motion sensor that you had to get pretty close to for it to turn on. One night, while getting home from work pretty late, I got out of my truck and grabbed my keys to lock it. That's when I saw it. As my headlights illuminated the woods in front of me for a split second, two dots reflected back towards me. They almost looked like eyes, but were too big and spread apart to be a person's eyes, and I convinced myself that I had been seeing things. When I tried clicking the lock button again, my headlights illuminated the woods once more, and I saw nothing. I went inside, feeling a little better, letting the thoughts slowly float away from my mind. If only I had known what I know now, maybe I wouldn't have been so calm. I should have called the cops, but can you blame me? If there really was someone there, they would have no doubt been gone the moment they saw a cop car pull up, and all that would have been found was an old mattress in the woods. While certainly creepy, I doubt the police would have given any serious thought to it. I should have done something, anything, because no matter how much I tried, I still couldn't get the idea out of my head. Someone was watching me from the woods, but I would never be able to confirm it. The moment I would go to investigate, the person could have run upon seeing me coming. I wish I would have thought of something, but I tried my best to just ignore it. A few months had passed, and the idea that someone was watching me had escaped my mind. At some point, my friend Ryan, who had been living with me, decided to make a dirt bike track through the woods. I showed him the mattress one day while we were walking through the woods, and he just laughed. For one reason or another, Ryan didn't share the same feelings I had towards the mattress. We grabbed an old machine from the barn with a bucket on the front and lifted the mattress into it. We took it back to the barn and threw it away in the dumpster. I remember a feeling of relief when we left it in the dumpster. Ryan slowly worked on the track, going back and forth from the machine to his dirt bike, tweaking every turn, jump, and straightaway until, after a few months, he had finished what actually turned out to be a pretty nice and fun track. Running through the woods, it had a few twists and turns, going around trees and clearings he had made with the old tractor. Hearing him ride around on his bike, and then the sound of an old diesel engine starting up, had grown so familiar to me on the weekends that I would almost forget the sounds were even happening. God, how I miss those sounds. Hey, I'm gonna go work on the track. I think I'm almost finished with it. It's going to be awesome, Ryan said on another Saturday morning. I had gotten so used to him disappearing into the woods weekend after weekend that it had almost become second nature. So much so that I didn't even notice as the time rolled around to 11 p.m. that day. I hadn't seen Ryan in a while. I didn't even realize that the noise I had been so accustomed to over the last few weeks was also missing. I stepped outside to a silent, chilly night to check on where Ryan had gone. His truck was still parked next to the house, as were mine and my girlfriend's vehicles. The old tractor was still sitting behind the house, just in front of the opening that led into the woods following the track. It looked like a deep, dark abyss with the faint light I could see coming off of the moon. I knew going in there alone at this time of night was the last thing I was going to do. So I resorted to every other option I could think of. I checked the barn where we kept the old tractors and found nothing but a calm breeze and crickets in the night singing. I checked the other houses that were on the property for the people who worked on the farm, hoping he had maybe gone over to one of them. Still, I found no sign of Ryan or his dirt bike. I tried calling his phone a few more times before giving up. After hearing his voicemail one last time, I knew there was only one thing left to do. So I grabbed the only flashlight I could find, one of those old-style bulb flashlights that was barely bright and made everything have a yellow tint to it. After taking a few more deep breaths and desperately trying to think of any other possible place he could be, I finally made my way towards the deep, dark, almost tunnel-like opening that led into the woods. I walked around the entire layout of the track for what felt like an eternity. Even though it had only been 45 minutes, I almost started to feel relieved that I could walk out of this dark, seemingly endless forest and think of another place to find him. Still, I had to look one last time. As I rounded the third pin turn, something caught my eye. Just past the turn, lying on its side in the weeds, I saw something that looked like plastic and was red in color. My heart dropped when all the ideas ran through my head. What if he's out there hurt? What if he had been waiting for me for hours with various broken bones? Or worse, what if it was too late? What if one of my best friends died because I was too scared to go out into a small patch of woods right next to the safety of my own home? I pushed the thoughts out of my head while starting to move closer to the bike, hoping I'd find a possibly injured but at least alive friend. What I found, in a weird way, was so much worse. Lying down on its side was Ryan's dirt bike with the same stickers that he had put all over it. But no Ryan. I searched everywhere I could, hoping he had maybe tried to crawl back to the house, but I couldn't find a single sign of him. Not in the woods, not near my home, not anywhere. It was almost like he had vanished. Against my better judgment, I went back into the woods, hoping to find some sort of clue. And while I somewhat found what I was looking for, it didn't make me feel any better or answer the biggest question going through my mind. Where the hell are you, Ryan? As I got closer to the bike, it looked seemingly normal. It was dirty, but that was to be expected on something with dirt in the name. I tried my best not to move it while searching for clues. I was looking closely at the side facing the ground when I noticed something. Sticking out of the back tire was a small piece of metal. I soon realized it was a nail sticking out of the tire, something that wasn't unusual on a farm. But then I kept looking. There were maybe 15 or 20 nails all along the back tire, far too many for it to be a coincidence. And I checked the front tire and found the same 20 or so nails sticking out from it also. Obviously something had happened here, but I wasn't going to be the one, so I ran out of the woods as fast as I could before calling 911. The police showed up maybe 15 minutes later. That was one positive to living in a small town. The police were never too far away. The cops searched the woods, brought out K9 units and everything. But they couldn't find a single sign of Ryan anywhere. We'll open a missing persons investigation in the morning, but for now, try to get some sleep. We'll find your friend soon, I'm sure of it, said Officer Langley, the first cop to show up on the scene and the last one to leave. His words were almost comforting in a way, like we might actually find Ryan wherever he may be. A few more months had passed, and Ryan was still missing. The police search was slowly fading out of anyone's mind, and I felt Ryan may soon join all those other missing people who were never found. Every few weeks, in the bright sunshine Florida is known for, I would walk around the track. It was almost meditation for me. Maybe I thought I might find something that would lead me to Ryan or where he went, but that never happened. By this time, the track had slightly overgrown with fresh green weeds, except for the small trail I would leave behind me walking around those woods. I missed Ryan, but knew I couldn't dwell on it forever. In the back of my mind, I thought I would never know what really happened that day, until I saw it. Lying in those damned woods on the ground, just off what now resembled a walking trail, was that old, dirty, fucking mattress. The feeling I got this time was almost revolting. I know we threw that mattress away. How the hell could it possibly be here in the woods? Why did it take so long for it to how back up? By now it should be 10 feet deep, buried under piles of garbage. I don't know what to do. I just had to sit down and write everything down the best I could remember it all. I don't know if I'll ever post this, but I can't get this uneasy feeling out of my stomach, no matter what I try. P.S. I wrote this a few weeks ago. I never thought it would see the light of day, but things have gotten so much worse. I can't explain it right now, but I knew that before I explain what is happening right now, I'd need to give some backstory. I will update as soon as I can. The night is far from over, and the horrors have only begun. I survived God's test. I sat in the dim light of my apartment, staring blankly at the mess around me. Dishes piled high, clothes I hadn't bothered to pick up in weeks, and newspapers cluttered the floor like a layer of dust on my past. Everything about this place felt dead, as lifeless as I felt inside. It's been 10 years since my parents died, but some days it feels like it was just yesterday. Other days, like tonight, it feels like they've been gone forever. I stopped believing in anything after they passed. Faith, hope, God, none of it meant anything to me anymore, but old habits die hard. I found myself sitting on the edge of my bed, hands clasped together like I used to when I was a kid, reciting half-remembered prayers. My words were hollow, slipping from my lips without meaning. I didn't believe anyone was listening. Why would they? I hadn't been to church in years, and hadn't even thought about God in any real sense since I watched them lower my parents into the ground. But here I was, whispering prayers into the void, feeling stupid for even going through the motions. The silence in the room felt suffocating. I let out a heavy sigh and ran my hands through my hair, pushing it back as I leaned forward, elbows resting on my knees. What was the point of all this? Every day felt like it bled into the next, an endless loop of nothingness. My friends had long since drifted away, and I couldn't blame them. I barely left the apartment anymore. Maybe they got tired of trying to pull me out of this pit when all I did was pull them in with me. It was in the middle of that silence, that heavy, crushing stillness, that I heard it. At first I thought it was just my imagination, a voice, soft but clear, cutting through the haze in my mind. I sat up straighter, my heart pounding for reasons I couldn't explain. "Jude," the voice said, smooth and comforting. "Jude, I've been watching you." I froze, my mind racing. Was I hearing things? The voice was calm, almost soothing, like it was speaking directly into my thoughts. "Who?" I whispered, my voice cracking from disuse. My heart thudded against my ribs, the pulse quickening as the voice continued. "I am God," it said simply, as if that explained everything. "And I have chosen you." A cold shiver ran down my spine. God? That's ridiculous. I hadn't believed in God in a long time. But there was something about the way the voice spoke, something that made my skin prickle with fear and a strange sense of comfort. "You feel lost," it continued, as if reading my thoughts. "You've drifted far from your path, but I am here now. I want to help you find your way again." I didn't respond. What could I say to that? My brain told me this was crazy, that I was losing my mind. But there was a part of me, the part that had been drowning in loneliness and despair, that wanted to believe it was real. I wanted to believe that someone, something, had come to save me from myself. I sat there for what felt like forever, staring into the darkened corners of my apartment, waiting for something else to happen. My heart was still racing, but my body felt frozen, as if I couldn't move even if I wanted to. The voice, that voice kept echoing in my mind. I am God. It was absurd, wasn't it? I wasn't some religious zealot or a man of faith anymore. But what else could it be? It wasn't like I'd had visitors recently, and it didn't sound like the kind of voice that came from a mind cracking under pressure. It was too calm. "I know you're afraid," the voice spoke again, softer this time, almost gentle. "But there's nothing to fear. I've come to help you, Jude." I swallowed hard, feeling the dryness in my throat. "Help me?" My voice came out quieter than I intended. I didn't want to sound desperate, but I knew I did. I felt desperate. "Yes," the voice replied, as steady and comforting as before. "You've suffered long enough. I can see the weight you carry, the burden of your loss. Let me lift it for you. All I ask is to walk with you, to live through you, and to experience what it is to be human." Something about the way it said that last part made my skin crawl, but I brushed it off. I wasn't in the position to question help, no matter how strange it seemed. Living through me? Experiencing humanity? That didn't sound so bad, did it? The Catholic teachings from my childhood floated to the surface of my mind. God moving through us, guiding our actions, helping us be better. Maybe that's what this was. I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. If this was real, if it wasn't some kind of delusion, maybe this was my chance to make sense of everything that had happened, of everything I'd lost. "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice a little stronger now. "Only what you've already been willing to give," the voice said, patient. "Your life, your experiences. I want to walk beside you, feel what you feel, and help you heal." In return, I will show you things you've never known. You'll find peace again. Peace. God, did I want that? The kind of peace that didn't feel like drowning in sorrow. The kind of peace that would let me sleep without waking up in the middle of the night, gasping for air with my heart pounding like I'd just been buried alive. I hesitated for only a moment longer before nodding, though I wasn't sure who I was nodding to. Okay, I whispered. If you're really God, and you can do what you say, I'll let you in. The second the words left my mouth, I felt something, like a cool breeze slipping inside my chest, filling the hollow space that had been there for so long. It wasn't unpleasant, but it was strange, like I could feel the presence of something, someone else inside me. Thank you, the voice said, quieter now but still soothing. Together, we'll do great things. I exhaled, realizing I had been holding my breath. The apartment seemed quieter now, still dark and cluttered, but there was a lightness in the air that hadn't been there before. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but it was enough to make me feel different. I stood up, shaky at first, but steadier than I'd been in weeks, maybe months. There was a new energy coursing through me, something alive and warm. It made me feel like I could take on anything. Maybe this was what faith felt like. Maybe I was finally finding my way back to something greater than myself. Now, the voice spoke again, guiding me. Let's begin. The days that followed were the brightest I'd had in years. The voice, soft and steady, kept me going, encouraging me to make small changes in my life. At first, it was simple things, cleaning up the apartment, tossing out the piles of trash I'd let build up for months. It was amazing how different it felt, how much lighter the air seemed once the place wasn't suffocating under the weight of clutter. The more I cleaned, the more I felt like I could breathe again. I started taking better care of myself, too. The voice, always calm and reassuring, nudged me to shower more often, to eat real food instead of living off frozen meals and takeout. The act of making a sandwich felt oddly fulfilling, as if I was reclaiming something I'd lost. For the first time in what felt like forever, I actually looked forward to the little things. It was as if the voice had flipped a switch inside me, lighting up the parts of me I'd buried in the darkness. You're doing well, the voice would say, that comforting tone wrapping around me like a warm blanket. This is the first step, you're on the right path. And I believed it. How could I not? My life was improving slowly but surely. I wasn't just sitting in that dingy apartment staring at the walls anymore. I was living again. The voice kept me focused, kept me grounded, and I found myself trusting it more with each passing day. But it wasn't just about cleaning and eating better. One morning, as I sipped on a cup of coffee I'd actually brewed myself instead of grabbing from the convenience store, the voice nudged me toward something bigger. It's time to reconnect, it said, as if it knew exactly what was on my mind before I even thought it. Your friends have been waiting for you. They miss you, Jude. I stared at the cup in my hands, the steam swirling up in delicate patterns. My friends, I hadn't thought about them in a while, not really. Sure, I saw them maybe 5 times a year, but it was always awkward, like we were strangers who shared old memories but nothing else. Over the years, I'd shut them out, unwilling to burden them with my misery. Yet the voice was right. They were still there, waiting for me. Maybe now that I had God with me, things could be different. Important to your journey, the voice continued. Reach out to them. Show them you're changing, that you're healing. They'll see it, and you'll help them too. There it was again, that idea of helping others. The thought didn't just sit with me. It bloomed inside my chest like a seed sprouting new life. Maybe I could help them. Maybe this wasn't just about me anymore. That afternoon, I sent out a few simple texts to the people I'd grown distant from. Hey, it's been a while. Want to catch up sometime? To my surprise, they responded, enthusiastically. Within a few days, I was sitting at a small cafe, sipping coffee with old friends I hadn't seen in months. At first, the conversation was light and casual, what everyone had been up to and how work was going. But as the hours wore on, we slipped into more personal territory. It was Tom who brought it up first. He leaned back in his chair, eyes distant, as he spoke about how he'd been struggling with anxiety, how it felt like the walls were closing in on him sometimes. I listened, nodding sympathetically, but I could feel the voice stirring in my mind. He needs to confront his pain, the voice whispered, soft but insistent. Push him. Make him face it head on. I hesitated. Tom's words were heavy, filled with uncertainty, and it didn't feel right to dig into that. But the voice, it sounded so sure, so certain that this was the way. I shifted in my seat, trying to figure out how to approach it. You know, I began carefully, sometimes you have to face that stuff directly. I've been going through some things myself, and what's helped me is confronting it, really digging deep, even when it hurts. Tom blinked at me, surprised. His expression shifted. Was that discomfort? But I pressed on, the voice urging me forward. Maybe you need to look at what's really causing it, I continued. Stop avoiding it. Let it hurt for a while, and then you'll come out stronger. He didn't respond at first, just stared into his cup. The silence felt heavy between us, like the air itself had thickened. My heart started to race. Had I gone too far? Had I pushed too hard? But the voice was calm, unbothered. You're helping him, it said, soothing me. This is what he needs. Tom finally looked up, his eyes dark and stormy. Maybe, he said quietly, but there was a tension in his voice, something fragile that I couldn't quite place. The rest of the conversation was more stilted after that. We talked a little longer, but the warmth from earlier was gone. I left the cafe feeling uneasy, as if something had shifted, but I couldn't pinpoint what it was. Still, the voice reassured me, telling me that this was how people grew, through pain, through confrontation. I convinced myself that I was helping Tom, even if it didn't feel that way at the moment. That night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the familiar pain in my back returned. This time it was sharper and more intense than it had been before. I groaned, shifting uncomfortably as the ache spread from my shoulders down my spine. Relax, the voice said, gentle but firm. This is part of the process. It's how you grow. I clenched my teeth as the pain intensified, a burning sensation now radiating from my shoulder blades. It felt like something was pressing against my skin from the inside, trying to break free. But even as the discomfort grew, I found myself accepting it, welcoming it. The voice was right. Pain was necessary. It was how we became stronger, how we grew. As the night wore on, the pain dulled into a throbbing ache, but I didn't fight it. I let it consume me, drifting into a restless sleep with the voice whispering softly in the back of my mind. This is only the beginning. The next few days passed in a blur. My back still ached, but I pushed it to the back of my mind, focusing on the progress I was making. Things were good, or at least they seemed that way. I was reaching out to friends more, keeping the apartment clean, and eating better. The voice kept guiding me, offering bits of advice that I followed without question. But Tom had been quiet since our last meeting. At first, I chalked it up to him needing time to process what I'd said. But after days of radio silence, a small seed of doubt began to grow in my mind. Had I gone too far? Had I pushed him when he wasn't ready? You did the right thing, the voice reassured me. He needs time, that's all. Growth comes through pain, Jude. You'll see. I wanted to believe it. I needed to believe it. After all, the voice hadn't steered me wrong yet. My life was better because of it. So, I pushed my doubts aside and focused on the next step in my journey. Reaching out to Mark, another old friend I hadn't seen in months. We arranged to meet at a local bar, the kind of place we used to frequent back in the day before everything had fallen apart. When I walked in, Mark was already there, sitting at a corner table with a beer in hand. He smiled when he saw me, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of hesitation, maybe. Or was it just my imagination? Jude, he said, standing up to greet me. It's been a while. Yeah, I replied, forcing a smile as I shook his hand. Too long. We made small talk for a while, catching up on the usual things, work, life, the weather. But the voice was there in the back of my mind, waiting. It felt like it was biding its time, waiting for the right moment to step in. And that moment came after Mark's second beer, when he leaned in a little closer, his voice lowering as he talked about his recent breakup. It's been rough, he admitted, his eyes downcast. I thought she was the one, but things fell apart. It's my fault, mostly. I guess I've just got too much baggage. She couldn't deal with it anymore. The voice stirred, its presence stronger now. He needs to face the truth, Jude, it whispered, insistent. He's hiding from himself. Make him confront it. I hesitated again, just like I had with Tom. But the voice's pressure was stronger this time, more urgent. It pushed me, and before I could stop myself, the words were spilling out. "You know, maybe she left because you weren't dealing with your own problems," I said, my tone sharper than I'd intended. "Maybe she saw the cracks and realized you were never going to fix them." Mark blinked, his expression shifting from sadness to confusion. "What?" "You've got to face it, Mark," I continued, the voice pushing me forward. "You can't just blame it on her leaving. If you want to move on, you've got to face your own shit. Stop hiding behind the breakup like it's all on her. You're the problem. And until you deal with that, no one's ever going to stick around." There was a long silence after that. Mark stared at me, his face tightening, a mix of shock and anger flashing across his features. I could feel my heart racing and the blood pounding in my ears. Had I gone too far again? Had I pushed him like I had with Tom? But the voice kept whispering, reassuring me. "This is for his own good, Jude. You're helping him grow. Pain leads to understanding." I didn't mean it like that," Mark stammered, his voice shaky. I don't know. Maybe you're right, but..." His words trailed off, and he looked away, his jaw clenched. I knew I'd hit a nerve, but instead of feeling guilty, I felt something else, a sense of satisfaction. The voice was right. This was how people grew, by facing their pain head on. The rest of the night was awkward. We didn't talk much after that. We just exchanged a few strained words before Mark made an excuse to leave early. I watched him walk out of the bar, the weight of the moment pressing down on me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I had done the right thing. I sat there alone for a while, sipping my beer and replaying the conversation in my head. The more I thought about it, the more I convinced myself that I had helped him, just like I'd helped Tom. It didn't matter that they both seemed uncomfortable, even hurt by my words. Growth was painful. That's what the voice kept telling me, and I believed it. As I walked home that night, the pain in my back flared up again, sharper this time. I stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, wincing as the burning sensation spread across my shoulders. It felt like something was moving beneath my skin, pushing against it, trying to break free. I stumbled, clutching at my back as the pain intensified, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. "Breathe, Jude," the voice whispered, calm and patient. "This is part of your transformation. You're becoming something more. Embrace the pain." I stood there, hunched over in the cold night air, gritting my teeth as the agony ripped through me. But I didn't fight it. I couldn't. If this was what it took to fulfill my purpose, to help others grow, then I would endure it. I would let the pain shape me, just like the voice had promised. After what felt like an eternity, the pain dulled, leaving a throbbing ache in its wake. I straightened up slowly, my body trembling, and continued walking home. By the time I reached my apartment, I was drenched in sweat, my legs barely able to carry me to my bed. As I lay there staring at the ceiling, the voice hummed softly in my mind, soothing me, calming me. "You're on the right path," it said. "Soon, you'll understand everything. This is just the beginning." I closed my eyes, my body still aching, but I felt something else now, something deeper. A sense of purpose, of destiny. Whatever was happening to me, I was ready for it. I texted Mark again, asking if he wanted to meet up. The first few texts went unanswered, but I kept pushing. After what happened last time, I understood why he might not be too eager to see me. I told him I wanted to apologize and that I just wanted to talk things through and make things right. After a long wait, he finally agreed. We planned to meet at my apartment this time. Something about the isolation of it felt right. The voice told me it was better this way. No distractions, no interruptions. We could really get into what was holding him back, and I could help him grow. The day came, and Mark showed up looking uneasy, fidgeting with his jacket zipper as he stood in my doorway. I tried to smile, to put him at ease, but there was a nervous energy between us that made my skin prickle. Still, I invited him in, and he hesitantly stepped over the threshold. The apartment was clean now, almost unrecognizable compared to the mess it had been before. Mark glanced around, visibly surprised at the change. "You've been busy," he commented, his voice strained with forced casualness. "Yeah, I've been making some changes," I said, keeping my tone light. "Trying to improve, just like I want to help you do." Mark's eyes flickered with something. Worry, maybe? But he nodded and sat down on the couch. I could see how tense he was, the way his shoulders were hunched forward as if he was bracing himself for something. We made small talk for a bit, just like we did at the bar last time, but I wasn't interested in the surface-level stuff anymore. The voice was there, whispering in the back of my mind, urging me forward. It was time to help Mark break through his walls. "You've been struggling," I said, cutting off the light conversation, "since the breakup. I know you're trying to move on, but you haven't really faced the real problem, have you?" Mark stiffened. His eyes darkened, his lips pressing together into a thin line. I don't want to get into all that again, Jude," he muttered. "Not like last time." But the voice pushed harder, louder now, drowning out any second thoughts I might have had. "He needs to feel it, Jude. He needs to suffer if he's ever going to grow." I leaned forward, my hands clasped together as I stared at him, my gaze unwavering. "You're never going to get past this if you keep running from it," I said, my voice firm. "You need to face the pain, Mark. You need to feel it deep down, or you'll never heal." Mark shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting toward the door. I don't think this is a good idea." Before he could move, before he could stand up to leave, the voice gave a final command. "Show him. Make him feel it." My hand shot out and grabbed his arm, gripping it tightly. Mark froze, his eyes widening in shock. "Jude, what are you doing?" "You need to feel it," I repeated, my voice steady but my grip tightening. "This is the only way. You can't keep running from the pain." I twisted his arm behind his back, forcing him to his knees as he yelped in pain. My heart raced, but the voice was there, soothing me, telling me this was right. This was how I was supposed to help him. "Jude, stop." Mark gasped, struggling against me, but I held him firm, pushing him down harder. His body twisted under the pressure, his breath coming in ragged gasps as I forced him to the ground. The voice was relentless now, filling my mind with its commands. "Make him suffer. Only then will he understand." My free hand reached for his throat, pressing down as his eyes filled with terror. His hands clawed at my wrists, trying to pry me off, but I didn't let go. I pressed harder, feeling his pulse quicken beneath my fingers. "This is for your own good," I whispered, my voice trembling with some twisted form of reassurance. "You'll thank me for this." Mark's face twisted in agony, his body writhing as he struggled to breathe. His gasps turned into choked sobs, and I felt something inside me shift. Something dark and violent taking root. The voice hummed in satisfaction, feeding on the pain I was inflicting. And then, suddenly, it wasn't just Mark who was suffering. A sharp, searing pain erupted in my back, so intense that I staggered, releasing him. My hands flew to my shoulders as the pain spread, tearing through me like a wildfire. I collapsed to my knees, gasping as the burning sensation reached its peak. Mark scrambled away, coughing and choking as he stumbled to his feet. I barely noticed him flee, my mind consumed by the agony ripping through my body. I could feel something moving beneath my skin, pushing, stretching, breaking free. The pain became unbearable, and I screamed, my voice raw and animalistic. My shoulders were on fire, my flesh tearing as something sharp began to poke through the skin. Blood soaked through my shirt, and I ripped it off, desperate to see what was happening. My back was a mess of torn skin and blood, but beneath the gore I saw them. Two jagged bony spikes protruding from my shoulder blades. They were growing, pushing their way out of me with sickening cracks and pops, stretching upward like twisted blood-soaked wings. The pain was unimaginable, but through it all I felt elated. The voice was there, soothing me, telling me that this was my transformation, my reward for doing God's work. "You're becoming something more," it whispered. "This is your destiny. Embrace it." I collapsed onto the floor, my body trembling, blood pooling beneath me. My vision blurred, the edges of the room darkening as I fought to stay conscious. But even as the darkness closed in, I couldn't help but smile. I had done it. I had helped Mark, just like I was meant to. And now, I was becoming something greater, something divine. As I slipped into unconsciousness, the last thing I heard was the voice, calm and reassuring. "You've done well, Jude. You're almost ready." The voice had grown louder and more demanding over the past few days. It wasn't satisfied with the small acts of pain I'd inflicted. I'd pushed Mark and Tom, I'd made them suffer, but it wasn't enough. The voice told me they were only steps on a path, a necessary part of my transformation. But there was more, something bigger, something I wasn't yet ready to see. That night, the voice called to me with a new urgency. "Now is the time, Jude," it whispered, its tone colder than before. "You've prepared yourself for this moment. You must bring suffering to the world. Only then will you truly become what I need you to be." I didn't question it. How could I? Everything the voice had told me up to this point had been right. I had seen the changes in myself, the transformation happening before my eyes, before my soul. The spikes in my back were proof that I was becoming something more than human. The pain, the agony I endured, it was all part of the process. But this time, the voice wasn't asking for words or emotional suffering. This time, it wanted something real, something irreversible. "Go out tonight," it commanded. "Find someone, a soul that needs to feel my presence. Bring them pain, Jude. Bring them to me." I didn't ask why. I didn't hesitate. I simply did as I was told. I left my apartment without a second thought, the cool night air hitting my skin as I stepped into the darkness. The city was quieter than usual. Empty streets stretched before me, illuminated by pale streetlights casting long shadows on the pavement. I felt a strange sense of calm as I walked, as if I knew exactly what I needed to do. The voice guided me, tugging at my mind, pulling me toward the quiet alleys and back streets. I walked for what felt like hours, my body moving on autopilot, until I saw her. She was standing by herself, waiting at a bus stop. A middle-aged woman dressed in a dark coat looking down at her phone. She was alone, vulnerable. "This is her, Jude," the voice said, its presence now overpowering. "She's the one. Her soul is ready. You must help her. Bring her pain. Bring her closer to me." I felt my heart racing, not with fear, but with anticipation. My hands twitched as I approached her, my footsteps barely making a sound on the cracked sidewalk. She didn't notice me until I was right behind her. "Excuse me?" I said, my voice steady, almost friendly. She turned around, startled. I could see the confusion on her face as she took a step back, her eyes flicking to the empty street around us. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. "You need to feel this," I whispered, taking a step closer. Her face contorted with fear, and she tried to back away, but I was faster. My hands reached out and grabbed her throat, squeezing tight before she could even scream. The shock in her eyes quickly turned to panic as she clawed at my arms, struggling to pull free. "Shh," I whispered, tightening my grip. "This is for you. You need to feel the pain. It's the only way to get closer to him." Her gasps filled the air, her body thrashing as she tried to fight me off, but I held her down, pressing her into the ground, the cold pavement beneath us. My grip tightened even more, my fingers digging into her skin as her struggles became weaker, her eyes wide with terror. I felt no remorse, no guilt. This was the right thing to do. She needed this. I was giving her a gift. Her body stopped moving after a while, the last breath escaping her lips in a faint, broken sound. I held on for a moment longer, waiting until the life drained from her eyes. When I finally let go, her body fell limp against the pavement. I stood there, breathing heavily, my hands trembling as I looked down at her lifeless form. A strange sense of satisfaction washed over me. The voice had been right. This was necessary. I had done what was asked of me, and now I would finally receive my reward. And then, the pain hit. It was unlike anything I had ever felt before. A burning, searing agony exploded in my back, sharper than the spikes that had emerged before. I screamed, my body convulsing as I fell to my knees beside her corpse. My hands clawed at my back, but there was nothing I could do to stop it. The pain grew worse, spreading from my shoulders down to my spine as if my entire body was being torn apart from the inside. And then I felt them. Something large, heavy, and wet pushing through the torn skin of my back. The spikes, the ones that had been there for days, began to stretch and grow, tearing through the flesh with a sickening crack. Blood poured from the wounds, staining the pavement beneath me as the spikes unfurled. I gasped, my breath ching in my throat as I felt them grow. Long, jagged, blood-soaked wings erupting from my back. They spread wide, casting dark shadows in the dim light of the street lamp, each movement sending waves of pain through my body. I could feel the blood dripping down my sides, pooling beneath me as the wings twitched and flexed, heavy and sharp. But through all the pain, I felt alive. I looked up at the sky, my body trembling as I knelt in the pool of blood, her lifeless body beside me. The wings beat once, twice, heavy and strong, sending gusts of air around me. "You've done it," the voice said, soft but triumphant. "You've brought her to me. You've embraced your destiny, Jude. This is what you were meant to become." The pain was unbearable, but it didn't matter. I had become something more, something divine. I had fulfilled my purpose. The wings, though grotesque and soaked in blood, felt like the final piece of my transformation. I had killed for God, and in return, He had given me this. As I knelt there, the blood still seeping from my wounds, I felt a strange peace settle over me. This was what I was meant to do. This was who I was meant to be. I woke up in the hospital, strapped to machines, barely able to move. At first I thought it was a dream, one of those nightmares where you can't scream, can't even open your eyes. But it wasn't a dream. This was real. I couldn't move, couldn't feel anything from the neck down. They told me I'd been found in the middle of the street, covered in blood, barely alive. The police thought I was the victim of some random attack. They said it was a miracle I'd survived at all. The woman I killed, they said she hadn't been so lucky. They told me they'd found her body next to mine, beaten, strangled, but they never suspected me, not once. They said someone must have attacked us both, that I'd somehow made it out alive while she didn't. It's strange. You'd think I'd feel relieved that I wasn't caught, but all I could feel was devastation. I had failed him. The wings, my wings, were gone. When I came to that hospital bed, paralyzed and broken, there was nothing left. No evidence of the transformation I had undergone. No proof of the divine being I was becoming. I had blacked out after my wings emerged, and now they were gone as if they had never been there at all. And that is what haunts me the most. I didn't get to finish the work. I didn't get to bring the world closer to Him, to help them understand the beauty of suffering, the purity of pain. When I lost consciousness, I must have disappointed Him. I failed God at the moment when He needed me most. Now I lie here in this bed, day after day, paralyzed, bedridden, useless. They gave me this device to help me communicate and to speak my thoughts aloud so I could share my story. But what good is it now? What good am I now? Still, even in this broken body, I feel something, a kind of peace. Yes, I failed Him in the end, but I was chosen. I was chosen to let Him experience life through me, and for that, I am grateful. Every moment of pain, every act of suffering I brought into this world, it wasn't for nothing. I allowed God to live through me, to feel what it means to be human. That was His wish, and I gave it to Him. Even if I couldn't see it through to the end, I did what He asked of me. I let Him feel. I lie here now, knowing I won't ever walk again. I won't ever leave this bed. But I still feel blessed. I was His vessel. I carried out His will, even if I didn't finish it. No one knows what really happened that night. They think I'm a survivor, some poor soul who barely escaped with his life. But that's not true. I wasn't the victim. I was chosen. I was His instrument, and I will never forget that. I close my eyes, and sometimes I can still feel the wings, the weight of them, the blood dripping from the tips. In those moments, I smile. I may have disappointed Him, but I let Him live through me. I gave Him what He wanted. And that's enough. Close your eyes, but don't dare fall asleep just yet. There's more to come. The bedroom. Sometimes I doubt the events of that night so many years ago are any more than a half-remembered dream. Yet in my heart, I know they are true. That particular night started out quite normally. Having just arrived home from grocery shopping, I deposited the few bags I had upon the kitchen table, and before I put my foodstuffs away, I realized that the morning feeding of the cat had been neglected. So I walked toward his dinner bowl, calling out, "Dinner time, HP." And I proceeded to fill his bowl as I waited for him to arrive. After his bowl was full, HP still had not showed himself. So again I called out slightly louder this time, "HP, it's time for dinner. Get it when it's fresh." Then after about 10 seconds, the thumping that could only be his hungry trot came echoing from upstairs. Down the stairs and around the corner, he walked into his room. As I looked down, he glared up with that, "Where have you been with my food?" look that all cats seem to have, and then strolled to his dish and began to eat. The master fed. I decided that I had better put away my foodstuffs lest I forget. To this means, I began to deposit all of my items into their respective places. As the last can of soup was placed in the cupboard, a low sound came from upstairs, as if a heavy person was standing and had shifted weight. But it being an older house and being in need of numerous repairs, it was passed off as just another creak. I began to walk toward the den, heading for the bookcase, when the sound came again. This time, I couldn't just pass it off. There was something in my house that did not belong. There is only one room in the upstairs of my house, the bedroom. Believing it to be an animal that had wandered in through the window above my bed, I decided it would be best to either chase said animal back out the window or, failing in that goal, catch the creature and release it back outside. After making a momentary stop in the utility room to grab my burlap bag that I keep for times like this, and another in the den to pick up the hunting knife just in case, I proceeded toward the bedroom. As I entered, HP rubbed against my leg. Not wanting whatever was in the room to harm him, I pushed him out of the door and quickly closed it behind me. Scanning across the room, I noticed that the single window had indeed been left open. However, there was no animal in sight. I did notice a peculiar odor I had not smelled in years, not since my wife dragged me to that New England town. The smell of the sea, of fish that were not quite rotten but not far from it. My search began under the bed, and except for a few dust bunnies, nothing could be found. I moved to the closet, and again nothing out of place. Behind the dresser, I found the copy of Bentley Little's The Collection I had believed stolen the week before, but still no sign of any wild animals. Having realized that whatever had made the noise must have left through the window by which it had entered, I stuck my head out of the window to look for tracks. As my hands laid on the window, I drew them back quickly. A thin layer of slime covered it. Closer inspection revealed it was the source of the odor. Leaning out the window, being careful not to touch it, looking for what had left the slime, I could hear the splashing in the river of large catfish, but sadly the time of night made seeing the ground below impossible. Deciding that all that mattered was that the animal had left, I closed the window. Upon opening the door and stepping out, I was greeted with a bite on the ankle from HP, and a look of, "Why do you always leave me out of the fun stuff?" Dropping down to my knees and rubbing him generously behind the ears was all it took for forgiveness. Rising back to my feet, I glared at my watch and observed that the hour hand rested just before 9. Seeing as I like to get in at least an hour of reading before I surrendered to sleep, I set my course for the den bookcase. Walking through the house with HP trotting along behind me, the memory of my late wife Jamie arose in my mind. Why the Lord decided to take such a sweet and beautiful creature from this world, I will never know. I plan on asking him in 20 years or so, maybe sooner. Arriving at the case and having my beautiful Jamie still on my mind, I picked her favorite book, Green Comes and Green Goes. I settled myself in my favorite reading chair, a simple wooden chair picked up one summer on vacation in Vermont. I began to read. However, my mind quickly wandered back to thoughts of Jamie. I began to think about what had taken my Jamie away from me. I sat remembering the day 5 years before when I discovered her in our bed. She had just returned home from a month-long research trip to the hills of eastern Kentucky, a town called Rock Nest. Curse that damnable place. She was researching for her new book about the folk gods that still lurk in the black holes nestled in America. She told me she wanted to take a nap, and half an hour later I found her with an empty bottle of sleeping pills in one hand and a note in the other. All the note said was, "Kaish waits in his lair for me dreaming." At the time, I did not know what it meant, except that my life had changed forever. I searched through her notes for days trying to make sense of it all. I learned more than I could ever what to know the ancient gods. Information about Kaish proved to be not as simply found. Only one harshly scribbled note revealed anything. I found a napkin tucked into the back of a notebook. It said only, "The hills of Rocknest worship a creature they call Kaish, son of the dark. I will speak to the elder tomorrow." Before long, I realized that I had sat there remembering my lovely Jamie for an hour without reading a single page. I closed the book, intending to return it to the case, when again the same noise sounded from the bedroom. Being sure that I had closed the window, and knowing that HP could not have made such a noise, I became a sight nervous. Walking back toward my bedroom once again, having my knife at the ready just in case, I kept hearing the noise. Upon reaching the door, I paused a second to steel myself and then opened the door. The same odor assaulted me, only stronger. Again, I searched the room and again found nothing. Checking the window, it was still shut tight. I jumped as something hit me in the back of my knee, spinning around, ready to gut the foul creature. The face that greeted me was none other than HP. I had forgotten to shut the door. Damn it, Kitty. You trying to give me a heart attack? If I die, I can't feed you. It was then that I saw it. I grabbed HP and ran out of the room and out of the house. I do not care to return to that house. What I saw that night has seen to that. For on the stand beside the bed sat our wedding photo with a note written in her hand stuck into the frame. Written on the note were these words, "Now Kaish waits for you. God save me." As I turned to flee, the picture winked. One story ends, but the darkness never rests. Shall we continue? Beyond the wall. You know that feeling as a child, when every time you stepped into a new place, there was a quiet tension hanging in the air. It wasn't the creaking floors or the dim corners that unsettled you. It was the sense that something was always just out of sight. No matter how hard you looked, you could never quite find it. But you knew it was there, lurking, waiting for you to let your guard down. When I moved to Clearfield in the summer of 2005 with only my mother and older brother, it felt like the beginning of a new chapter that I wasn't prepared for. We packed up our lives in the city, leaving behind the familiar streets I'd known all my life. The small town had a quiet, almost stagnant feeling to it, far from the constant noise and activity I was used to. By the time we arrived, it was late August, just weeks away from the start of the new school year. The air was heavy with that end-of-summer stillness, where the days were long and the nights seemed to stretch forever. I knew I'd have to adjust, and that meant bracing for 5th grade in a school full of strangers. Finding new friends was the biggest hurdle looming over me. I still talked to my best friend William, back at home. We kept in touch through texts and calls, but there was a distance growing, a gap that couldn't be filled with words alone. He had his own life back there, and I had to build mine here. The thought of starting over felt overwhelming. New faces, new routines, the awkwardness of finding your place all over again. Every day was a reminder that I was somewhere new, somewhere unfamiliar, and the unease of that weighed on me. But Clearfield, despite its quiet, had a strange energy to it, like there was something about the town I hadn't quite figured out yet. One afternoon, after another long day of trying to settle into the routine of this strange new place, I found myself restless. The house felt too quiet, and the walls too confining. I needed to get out, to clear my head. I had brought my bike out of the garage, hoping for an excuse to get out and explore. "Ma, can we go for a bike ride?" I asked, hoping she'd say yes. She hesitated for a second, then called up the stairs. "Hey, take your brother out for a ride." My older brother, who was 7 years older than me and still sulking over the move, yelled back from his room, "He's old enough to go by himself. I'm not his babysitter." My mom winced, clearly exhausted by his attitude. She sighed, one of those long, weary sighs that said more than words ever could. "Come on, just take him. It won't kill you to get out for a bit." There was a pause, and then his voice rang out again, sharper this time. "I've got my own stuff to figure out. I don't have time to babysit him every time he wants to wander off." The usual bitterness was back, the kind of snark that had become his go-to ever since we moved. My mom looked at me, her shoulders slumping just a little. "Fine," she muttered, turning to me. "You can go by yourself, but be back before 6, okay?" "Okay." I said, relieved to escape the tension between them. I hopped on my bike, ready to lose myself in the quiet streets of this unfamiliar town. As I rode through Clearwood on my bike, the town revealed itself in pieces, little fragments that felt half hidden but familiar. First, there was that old church, the one with the cracked bell tower. The bell hadn't rung in years. Mom said it was broken, but you could still hear it creak in the wind sometimes. It sat there as if waiting for someone to fix it, but no one ever did. Next was the police station, a squat brick building that looked more like an oversized house. Sheriff Donnelly always parked his car out front, and I swear I'd never seen him go inside. It was like he was always waiting, sitting in his cruiser, sipping coffee, watching everyone pass by. The fire station was a little more lively. The big garage door was almost always open, and you could see the red fire truck gleaming inside. I liked riding past it, hoping I'd catch a glimpse of the firefighters gearing up, but they mostly hung around, washing the truck or sitting in fold-out chairs. Then came Main Street, a line of mismatched shops that seemed to be from different eras. There was the hardware store, its windows cluttered with dusty tools, nails, and paint cans. None of it looked like it had been touched in years. Next to it was Mr. Thompson's bakery, the smell of fresh bread sneaking out through the cracks in the door. You couldn't miss the candy store either. Its bright, hand-painted sign made it stand out, even though it was barely bigger than a closet. It had jars of gumdrops and bubble gum sitting right in the window, tempting me as I rode by. The corner store was my favorite, though. It looked worn down now, barely hanging on since that new grocery store opened up. I felt kind of bad for it. There was an old man who sat behind the counter most days, reading the paper, not even looking up when you walked in. But the best part was always the movie theater at the end of the street. It had this huge neon sign with letters that flickered on and off. The marquee was always a little off, like the letters had been rearranged by a kid who didn't quite know how to spell. Even if the movie was something boring, I'd always ride by just to see the lights shining against the dark windows, like the theater was the only thing in town still awake. It was almost like a last spark of summer, a reminder that there was still a little magic left before everything changed. That magic didn't last long, though. The rest of summer break seemed to pass by in a blur of lazy afternoons and quick bike rides around town. And before I knew it, the first day of school was upon me. The glow of the theater faded into the background as my focus shifted to the looming challenge ahead. I remember getting up early, feeling a mix of excitement and nerves as I put on my new clothes. My backpack was stiff with unused supplies, and the notebooks inside were crisp and fresh, but the thought of unfamiliar faces and the daunting task of making new friends hung over me like a dark cloud. As the day went on, I found myself seated next to James in class. He was a friendly kid with a big smile, and as he turned to introduce himself, I learned that he was as approachable as he seemed. "Hey, I'm James. You're new here, right?" he asked, his curiosity genuine. I nodded, feeling a bit more at ease with his warm demeanor. James went on to introduce me to his friend Cole, who sat a few rows over. Cole had a knack for making people feel included. He waved from his seat and offered a friendly, "Hey there," when he saw us talking. James and Cole quickly became my anchors in this new environment. They shared their favorite pastimes and hobbies, and I discovered that we had more in common than I'd expected. James was into comic books and video games, while Cole was an avid reader of adventure novels and loved building things with his hands. As it turned out, I had a soft spot for comic books and enjoyed the thrill of adventure. We bonded over our shared interests, discussing our favorite superheroes and the latest book we'd read. Cole even showed me some of the models he'd built from scratch, which impressed me more than I let on. Their easy camaraderie and the way they immediately welcomed me into their circle made the daunting prospect of starting over a lot less intimidating. By the end of the day, I felt like I'd found a small piece of familiarity in a sea of newness. As the week progressed, our friendship grew stronger. We began spending more time together, each day revealing new facets of Clearfield that I hadn't yet discovered. Cole and James were eager to share their favorite spots and hidden corners of the town with me. One afternoon, Cole invited me over to his house. It wasn't just a casual invitation. It was a chance to dive deeper into their world and explore the local secrets they had hinted at during our conversations. They eagerly took me to the small pond where we spent hours skipping stones, the ripples catching the light in a way that felt both calming and exciting. We also explored a series of old, unused railways where we wove our own stories of adventure and daring escapades. It was in these moments that Clearfield began to feel less like an unfamiliar place and more like a canvas waiting for our adventures. As the days passed and our friendship deepened, James and Cole began to share more of the town's secrets with me. One afternoon, after we'd spent hours exploring the old railways and tossing pebbles into the pond, Cole suddenly grew more serious. He glanced at James, who nodded subtly and then turned to me with a look that was both intriguing and slightly unsettling. "Hey, there's something we haven't told you about," Cole said, his voice dropping to a whisper as if he was about to share something forbidden. "It's about the wall." "The wall?" I asked, curious. We'd passed a tall, weathered wall on our bike rides, a boundary that seemed to separate the town from the woods beyond. James leaned in, his eyes gleaming with a mix of excitement and apprehension. "Yeah, it's not just any wall. People say it's more than just a barrier. It's like a threshold between our world and something else." "What do you mean?" I asked, feeling a shiver run down my spine despite the warm afternoon. Cole exchanged a glance with James before continuing. "There's this old legend about the wall. It goes like this. If you're brave enough or foolish enough to go past it, you might never come back. They say there's something out there, a creature they call the Dybbuk." "Dybbuk?" I repeated, the name sounding both strange and eerie. James nodded. "Yeah, no one knows what it looks like. Some people say it's like a shadow or a mist, something you can't quite see but always feel. Others think it's more tangible, like a creature that hides just out of sight. Either way, the stories are always the same. People who go beyond the wall disappear." "Disappear?" I echoed, my heart racing a bit. "Like they're gone?" "Exactly," Cole said. "No trace, no sign of where they went. It's like they were just erased from existence. It's why nobody goes near the wall anymore," James continued. "There are accounts of people who've heard whispers or seen flickering lights in the distance, but no one's ever gotten close enough to figure out what's really out there." I looked at the wall, feeling a mix of fear and fascination. The old stone seemed even more imposing now, standing silent and mysterious against the backdrop of the forest. The idea of something lurking beyond it, waiting for anyone brave enough to cross, sent a chill through me. "Have you ever thought about going past it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Cole and James exchanged another glance, their expressions unreadable. "We've thought about it," James admitted, "but it's one of those things that seems better left alone. Sometimes curiosity is best kept in check." "I guess so," I said, trying to shake off the unease. "But it's kind of hard not to wonder, right?" "Yeah," Cole said with a half smile. "Just remember, some mysteries are better left unsolved." As we turned away from the wall and headed back to town, the air felt heavier, the wall seeming to loom larger in my mind. The tales of the Dybbuk added a new layer of intrigue and caution to our adventures, making me wonder what else Clearfield was hiding in its shadows. The weeks following our conversation about the wall felt like a return to normalcy. The thrill of new friendships and school routines settled in, and for a while, the strange tales of Clearfield seemed like distant echoes. My days were filled with the innocent joys of childhood. Bike rides through town, lazy afternoons spent at the park, and after-school hangouts with James and Cole. One crisp October morning, as the air carried the promise of autumn, I got up early and prepared for another school day. My brother was supposed to be heading out at the same time, and I caught glimpses of him trudging down the stairs, half asleep and grumbling about the new routine. "Have a good day," Mom called out, her voice muffled by the clatter of breakfast dishes. My brother just waved absent-mindedly and left, the door closing behind him with a soft thud. School that day was filled with the usual chatter and laughter. James, Cole, and I talked about everything from the latest comic books to the best places to get pizza in town. We were caught up in the innocence of childhood adventures, our worries momentarily forgotten. It was later in the afternoon when I returned home, my backpack heavier with the day's work and my thoughts already drifting to what we might do after school. As I rounded the corner onto our street, I noticed something odd. Sheriff Donnelly's cruiser was parked in our driveway, the car's flashing lights dimly visible even though they weren't on. A lump formed in my throat as I approached the front door. With a mix of curiosity and apprehension, I pushed it open. Inside, I was met with an unusual sight. My mother was standing in the living room, her face pale and strained. She was talking to Sheriff Donnelly, who sat on the edge of the couch, his expression serious and concerned. "Mom?" I called out hesitantly, my voice echoing through the quiet house. I could see the concern in her eyes as she turned to face me. "Oh, you're home," she said, her voice trembling slightly. She forced a tight smile, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Come here, sweetheart." I walked over, my heart pounding. The sheriff stood up, giving a nod before heading toward the door. "We'll continue this discussion later," he said quietly, his eyes briefly meeting mine with a look I couldn't quite decipher. As the sheriff left, my mother's expression grew more somber. She sat down on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped together tightly. "Your brother," she began, her voice catching in her throat. "He's gone missing." "Missing?" I repeated, the word feeling heavy and foreign on my tongue. "Yes," she said, tears welling up in her eyes. "He didn't come home from school. We've been looking for him, but we think he might have run away." I felt a cold chill spread through me. But why would he run away? What happened? She shook her head, struggling to hold back her tears. "We don't know for sure. There's no sign of where he went or why he would leave. The sheriff is trying to figure out what happened, but right now, they think he might have just left on his own." The room seemed to close in around me as the weight of her words settled. I wanted to ask more, to understand why or how this could happen. But my mother's anguished look told me that there were no answers right now. "Can I help look for him?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mom reached out and took my hand, squeezing it gently. "Not right now. You need to stay here, be safe. We'll figure this out, I promise." I nodded, feeling helpless and scared. The world outside seemed to lose its color as I sat down beside her, the uncertainty hanging over us like a dark cloud. As I headed to my room, my mind was swirling with questions. Where could he have gone? Why would he run away? Each thought seemed to collide with the next, creating a whirlwind of confusion and fear. I tried to piece together any clues, any reason why my brother would leave without a word. But amidst the chaos of my thoughts, one solitary idea surged forward, cutting through the noise like a sudden gust of wind. The wall. I froze in the hallway, the memory of our conversation with James and Cole crashing back into my mind. The mysterious tales of the wall and the Dybbuk seemed to echo louder than ever. What if he went beyond the wall? The idea seemed both impossible and terrifying. Why would he go there? What was beyond that barrier that could lure someone away? I tried to push the thought aside to cling to more logical explanations, but the image of that old stone wall loomed larger and larger in my mind. I paced my room, the shadows growing longer as the day turned into evening. My brother's absence felt more profound now, the emptiness of the house pressing down on me. I couldn't shake the feeling that the wall, with its dark and unspoken secrets, was somehow connected to his disappearance. Without knowing exactly why, I felt a compelling urge to find out. Maybe it was the fear of the unknown or the desperate need for answers, but I knew that if I wanted to understand what had happened, I had to confront that wall and the mysteries it held. The thoughts raced through my head, about sneaking out, about what I might find, and about the stories that had seemed so far-fetched only days before. As night fell and the house grew quieter, the idea of investigating the wall seemed less like an option and more like a necessity. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. The wall was more than just a physical barrier. It had become a symbol of the unknown, a threshold that might hold the answers I desperately needed. It had only been 4 days since my brother's disappearance, but the weight of those days felt like an eternity. Each day without him was a relentless cycle of worry and unanswered questions. The thought of the wall, and what might lie beyond it, gnawed at me more with each passing hour. I decided that this Saturday would be the day I would confront that unknown. I knew it was a risky decision, but the need for answers outweighed my fears. I wasn't ready to share this with James and Cole. The stories they had told me were enough to make me hesitate, but I couldn't ignore the growing sense of urgency within me. Instead, I planned to tell my mom that I was going to Cole's house. I figured she'd be more relieved to know I was with friends, even if the truth was far more complicated. I rehearsed what I would say, making sure my story was convincing enough to avoid suspicion. Saturday morning arrived, bringing with it a mixture of dread and resolve. I went through my usual routine, eating breakfast and making small talk with my mom to keep up appearances. "Heading to Cole's house now?" I said, trying to sound as casual as possible. "Okay, sweetheart," Mom replied, her eyes tired but not quite as distraught as the days before. "Be careful and let me know if you'll be out late." I will, I promised, feeling a pang of guilt but pushing it aside. See you later. I stepped out into the crisp autumn air, taking a moment to brace myself before getting on my bike. As I rode toward the edge of town, my mind raced with questions and fears. The wall was only a short distance away, but the journey felt endless as I contemplated what I might find. When I finally reached the wall, its imposing presence seemed even more formidable up close. The old stones were covered in moss and ivy. Gripping the rough stone, I began to climb. The moss and ivy provided some traction, but the climb was harder than I anticipated. My fingers scraped against the uneven surface, and my heart pounded in my chest with each step upward. I focused on the top, trying not to look down or think about the drop. Finally, I reached the top and pulled myself over, landing on the other side with a quiet thud. I took a deep breath and looked around. The world beyond the wall was even more eerie and unfamiliar. The forest stretched out before me, dense and shadowy, the air filled with an unsettling silence. I took a hesitant step forward, the forest floor crunching beneath my feet. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow more ominous. I had no idea what awaited me, but the need to find my brother drove me onward, deeper into the unknown. The dense underbrush tangled around my legs, and the forest seemed to close in on me. I pushed through the thick foliage, my breaths coming in quick, shallow gasps. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional snap of a twig or the rustle of leaves. Just when I thought I might be completely lost, a flicker of light caught my eye. I squinted through the darkness and moved toward the faint glow, my curiosity overcoming my trepidation. The light grew stronger as I approached, guiding me through the maze of trees. Pushing aside branches and stepping over tangled roots, I finally emerged into a small clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a weather-beaten shack. Its wooden walls were weathered and worn, and the roof sagged in places, as if it had borne the weight of countless storms. A single lantern hung from the doorframe, its weak light casting long, eerie shadows across the ground. The sight was both unsettling and intriguing, and I felt a chill run down my spine as I approached the shack, the lantern's glow the only beacon in the enveloping darkness. Curiosity got the better of me, and I took a cautious step forward. The door to the shack was slightly ajar, and a thin beam of light escaped through the crack. I placed my hand on the door, feeling the cool, rough wood beneath my fingers. My heart pounded as I slowly pushed it open. Inside, the shack was dark and musty. The light from the lantern barely reached the corners of the room. The faint smell of old wood and dampness filled the air, but there was another odor beneath it, a nauseating, pungent stench that made my stomach churn. The shack was cluttered with old wooden crates and various rusty implements, their shapes suggesting a once grim purpose. What caught my eye were the large black trash bags piled haphazardly in the corner. They were stained and bulging as if they were stuffed with something heavy. I couldn't see inside, but the smell grew stronger as I approached, a sickly, metallic tang that was almost overpowering. The scattered, grimy tools and the floor marked with dark stains hinted at something unsettling. I felt a wave of dread wash over me, the realization that something was wrong settling like a stone in my gut. I took a glance around the rest of the room, my mind racing. The sight of the bags and the heavy, oppressive atmosphere made me feel uneasy. I knew I needed to leave before I found out more. I backed away from the bags, my footsteps echoing in the small space. The air felt heavier with each passing second. Suddenly, a chill ran down my spine. I had an unsettling sensation of being watched, as though unseen eyes were following my every move. My breath came in quick, shallow gasps as I turned and fled from the shack. The darkness of the forest seemed to press in on me, each shadow more menacing than the last. The crunch of leaves and the snap of twigs underfoot felt magnified, like a chorus of unseen predators closing in. Panic surged through me as I stumbled through the underbrush, the feeling of being pursued intensifying with every step. My heart pounded furiously, and I could hear my ragged breathing mixing with the imagined sounds of footsteps behind me. The wall, once a distant boundary, now seemed like a lifeline. I had to get over it quickly. I scrambled up the wall, my fingers scraping against the rough surface, the fear of being caught pushing me faster. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something emerging from the trees. I finally reached the top and threw myself over, landing on the other side with a jarring thud. I stumbled down the other side and continued running, the dark forest seeming to close in around me. The thought of what I had seen in the shack drove me onward. I knew I had to get back home. The image of those bags and the unsettling smell lingered in my mind as I emerged from the trees and saw the familiar sight of the town in the distance. I felt a shiver run down my spine. Something wasn't right about these woods. What's more frightening than what we've just heard? Perhaps the next nightmare will answer that. The pain in my left arm has been growing. My name is Alan. I'm 15 and I live in a small town south of Wyoming. My dad passed away last year, and my mother has been trying to find the solution to her problems at the bottom of a bottle since his passing. She doesn't acknowledge me much, but I've grown to get used to it in the last few months. The pain in my left arm has been growing the last few days. A few weeks ago, it was only a small itchy sensation in the forearm area. I paid it no mind, of course. I mean, who would? I was most likely stunned by a mosquito or bitten by some other small bug. I would later be proven more wrong than I thought possible. After the first week, the itch had been replaced with a feeling of soreness. This was when I first started to put forward the idea that this could be more than a simple itch or bite. I pushed the idea aside. It's not like I could do anything about it. The nearest hospital is hours away, so I couldn't possibly get checked out. It doesn't help that my mom's car broke down a few months back. It's just sore, nothing to worry about. That was until last Wednesday. The soreness was a burning feeling. It was as if my forearm was filled with needles, and each of them were scraping against the bone, just hoping to make it to the center. I also noticed a small lump forming in the center of where the itch had first originated. I tried to tell my mom. Maybe she'd take me seriously and I'd be able to find some way to a clinic or hospital. However, this attempt was met with an immediate, yeah, whatever, go play outside. So I decided to push through the pain. My mom had a trip a few days after that, and I didn't want to ruin that for her. God knows she needs it. My mom left for her trip a few days before the incident. A small needle-sized hole appeared on the lump. That, and the lump had begun to grow. The itching and pain had become too much, and I had begun to pick at the lump, only slightly expanding the small hole. It was then that a small black toothpick-like line began to come from the hole. Then another, and another. I froze in my tracks. Spiders. I let out a scream as more spiders of all sizes began to crawl out of my arm and began to burrow into different parts of my arm. Then it hit me. They were going to turn my entire arm into a sort of nest. I panicked and walked into what used to be my dad's study. I was hoping that he had left some sort of medicine or acid or I don't know anything to get these spiders out of my damn arm. I rummaged through all of his drawers and found only a bunch of books and a giggly saw. I hesitated, but was quickly snapped back to reality by the feeling of the spiders moving inside of my arm. I grabbed the giggly saw and bit onto one tip of the saw and held the other tip with my right arm as I began to move my arm back and forth. The saw line scraped into my shoulder as I continued to cut through my arm, tears coming to my eyes. Blood trickled down my side as the saw line moved through my shoulder muscle. Through the muscle as I hit the bone. I winced in pain and bit down on my shirt collar as I began to sob. My lifeless left arm fell to the ground as I began to crawl away from it, holding where my arm once was. I got up and ran onto the street, holding where my shoulder once was. That leads up to today. I lay here in a hospital bed typing this out on my phone. I'm just glad it's over. The only thing that worries me is that the police had told me that they went to investigate my house and said that they found the giggly saw. However, my left arm was nowhere to be found. The fear lingers, but something worse is creeping closer. Ready for the next? Me, my strength, myself, my weakness. I was 19 at the time. I live in Greece. Drinking age is 18. It's Christmas 3 to 4 in the morning and I'm returning home from a nice night out. It was pretty chill. Many friends showed up, but nothing crazy happened. Just laughing, sharing stories. Noon got shit-faced. No drama, no breakups, hookups. It was really pleasant. I live on what it is called Grape Rose, it's usually a huge, extremely busy road connecting to the city, and behind it, rows upon rows of houses all next to each other. Those streets are pretty quiet, which was cool growing up because we could play sports on the street. Every 500 meters or so, there would be a connecting road connecting you to all the other roads. As you go up the Grape Rose, street lights become scarce. At first, you see the two streetlight lights meeting each other. As you go up, there's a street light, then 300 meters of darkness, then another light. I live at the tippy top of the Grape Rose. This night happened to be extremely windy, so windy you could barely hear anything. As I'm coming close to a connecting road, I make sure to look left and right in case I don't hear a car coming up. On my right, about 500 to 300 meters away from me, I see a white square perfectly hovering 3 meters from the street. At first, I thought it might be an albatross sitting on a garbage bin, and the bin beneath it, it's not visible. But why would a garbage bin be in middle of the street? Then I thought it might be a white suitcase on top of a black car, but still, with all the windows of a car, there is still some reflection even from a black car. I kept staring at this thing. I started noticing it was very slowly coming towards me. There was literally nothing beneath it. This white square was not making any living moves. It was perfectly hovering. Then 2 sticks came from the side of it, making it shaped like a cross. It started coming towards me very fast. I started sprinting with everything I got. I never looked back. It was really windy. It was so noisy, I could only hear my breathing and my heartbeat, which made me focus on my run. The wind gave a nice breeze towards my face, and the adrenaline was making my sprint effortless. After 5 kilometers of running, my legs shut down. Like a switch, I fell on the street. I look back, the white cross, it's almost at me. The white cross stops. I hear laughing. A neighbor was sitting on the steering wheel of a black bicycle, completely covering the driver of the bicycle and the bicycle itself. He was wearing a glow-in-the-dark long-sleeve shirt, and the rest of his outfit was black. He was holding his arms out while the other guy was bicycling behind him. The bicycle is surprisingly thin if you look at it facing you. The neighbor said while laughing, "You must have looked at your face. You were so scared. Did you think we were gypsies?" First of all, that's racist. But I didn't want to admit what I truly thought. I believed in alien ghost hybrids for 30 minutes while running for my life. The driver of the bicycle was visually sweating and out of breath, said, "Solid run, fatty." The neighbor, I thought he was cool guy. Never part of the group, a little hermit. After this experience, even on his best efforts, I don't want to hang out with this guy again. The willingness to take the joke this far fucked me up. If I did this once, I saw the person being really scared, I would yell it's a joke and calm them down. And just when you think the terror is over, a new nightmare begins. Someone, please teach me manners. I don't know what will happen if I don't learn it in time. I stood there for quite some time, pressing my back against the wall, shifting my position, yet never finding an ideal spot. It wasn't comfortable. I had to wrestle the urge to go away. The toothy cold gnawed at my face and fingertips. I expected some chill, but not this. My arm grew weary while holding my phone, which I felt getting heavier by the second. I now understood why the place had gained a haunted reputation. That gas station wasn't in the best conditions, faded painting in most parts, from the floor to the canopy. Some light bulbs were weaker and dirtier than others, gathering flies stuck in cobwebs, about to meet their hairy, many-eyed, wall-walking, 8-legged demise. The view mirrored an old gray photo, all color having retreated under the indifferent grasp of night. The fact that I noticed this proves that I was bored of waiting. Still no signs of the supposed blood-stained tire marks that would appear where a person got ran over here a decade ago. I wasn't there for that, of course. It had always struck me as a made-up story with no regards to believability. I took the unusual opportunity to go through horror stories put in my ever-expanding read later list. It worked, to great effect. The reckless, solitary stay under the dark sky made me feel tense, helpless. The previous boredom dismembered as I read about supernatural monsters and gruesome murders. It was exciting, it brought me to the edge, and you should definitely not do it. Despite being skeptical of the more mystic elements, it reminded me that people are just as horrifying. No criminals went out at night on that town, as something worse takes their place instead, that's the saying. I was there to learn why, yet my doubts grew bigger. I consider myself good in putting apart fiction from reality, but something felt different, hazier, dreamlike. I was failing to calm down my fearful side with rational thinking. In a burst of caution, I looked around, the only sources of light being the gas station and copy-pasted streetlights besides the road in front. A single shade of darkness covered everything else. I was ready to go inside the main building, but the humming of an approaching car made me stop. The last thing you want to do is to run away. I retold these words to myself. If the story was true, then the best thing to do is wait. Sounds of the engine got closer, coming from down the road. A faint white fog started to build up close to the ground. The humid air made breathing a laborious task. I felt the cold droplets build on my face. The car sounded more threatening than ever, and the urge to run assaulted my mind. I felt the string of muscles in my legs tense up, ready to work. The act of standing in place instead felt suicidal. I looked at the road, but I saw no signs of the car whose noise spread over the whole place. It was empty, despite the feeling that the noise was coming from right in front of me. As I noticed more aspects of the supernatural, an unexplainable wave of drowsiness struck me. The cold, hard wall on my back now feeling like an inviting mattress as I closed my eyes. The sound of the car being overridden by noiseless sleep. When my eyes opened, I saw a hearse parked on the road in front of me. It was covered in black paint, and it had a metallic reflection. It was clean and polished. I could feel the aroma of an old car with my eyesight, even if I was too far to smell it. I saw the silhouette of a woman through the side window. She was sitting in the back of the car and looking forwards. The figure's outline sharply defined, contrasting the glow of the streetlights. She remained deathly still, like a portrait behind the glass. Seconds later, the door on the driver's seat started to open. Slowly, the way it moved evidenced its heavy weight. I heard strained hinges. I don't know if the sound was actually real or part of my imagination, given how far I was from the car. When the door opened, the urge to run overwhelmed me, yet I didn't move. However, this time my stillness wasn't a product of a rational mind, but instead of an indescribable sense of doom that paralyzed my very soul. A figure stepped out of the driver's seat. It had a pale skull, which rested on top of a set of long bones. Each bone lodged inside each holes on the lower part of the cranium, giving it support. Sets of cloaks, belts, and garments that resembled a rich man from a century ago covered the rest of his body. His clothes, gray and black, stretched from his shoulders to the ground, in a confusing array of layers. The fog from earlier thickened, covering the floor as the figure started to move in my direction. He approached me at a constant pace, without any of the fluctuations of speed and body movements of someone on two legs. Instead, he moved like he was sliding on ice. He kept his head high as his posture mimicked royalty. I pressed my feet hard against the ground and started running, or at least I thought I did. But despite feeling the strain on my flesh, my body remained still. My legs chose to stay in place, and my eyes decided to lock on the one who was approaching me. Darkness coated every object in my view as he walked past it. As far as my vision was concerned, everything behind him ceased to exist. After an agonizing amount of time, he finally reached me, bringing an ashy smell with him. "Hello there, friend. Care to hear a story?" Surprise slapped me in the face. I took time to process that he was talking to me. The gravelly, deep voice carried casual words were delivered with power. The sudden shift in tension stunned me. The dark smoke behind him dissipated, and I felt the control of my muscles returning. Yet, I remained alarmed, with a shaking feeling inside my chest. I could hear impatient demand from the few words he uttered. Feeling like I was on a timer, I gave him a quick and thoughtless answer as I tried to step away. "I am sorry, sir, but I'd rather not. I'm waiting for someone, and..." His unearthly appearance and overwhelming aura mutilated my chances to speak with calm and confidence. I showed out hesitation and fear as I tried to come up with a dismissive excuse. He caught this, then moved closer. The void eye sockets kept staring at me as he grumbled with authority. "I am trying to have a nice talk with you, and I am not a fan of being denied, kid." A talk with me is more fruitful than whatever pointless thing you are doing. Show your manners and hear what I have to say." His tone was now more threatening and aggressive, ripping through the silent night with hostility. Seeing the danger in the situation, I stopped in place. I then looked at the ground, foggy enough to conceal my feet. I used the break in eye contact to think better of a way to salvage the situation. "Of course. I would love to hear what you have to say. Just go on, I'm all ears." My words were nervous. My mind raced in anticipation to his answer as I conjured a shaky smile. I tried to back away from him, but a wall behind me blocked my movements. I felt the cold pierce through my clothes and cause shivers on my skin. "Your fake enthusiasm does not fool me, boy." He spoke with a patronizing sting. Then he let the words sink in for a second before continuing. "I will let this one pass, but I will not tolerate any further disrespect." In contrast to mine, his words were firm and decisive. He cleared his non-existent throat, then spoke again. "You see, an immense tragedy has struck my family some time ago. My lovely sister killed by a terrible, terrible illness. We could only watch as she spat her bones out, one by one." He exclaimed in an over-the-top fashion, his bony jaw opening wide as he did so. Something under his shoulders, beneath his cloak, moved to add to the drama. This made me doubt how much the event affected him, or if it was even real to begin with. Feeling the need to answer, I came up with some awkward words. "I see. Well, The figure interrupted me before I could finish my sentence. She was indeed a very caring and kind person. It is very saddening to see something like this happen, is it not? I felt pressured to show empathy to his troubles. Inside, his words failed to move me. I never lost someone close, neither did I know how to react to it. While I pondered, a sound of approaching steps on wet dirt, then on hard ground, surprised my ears. I lifted my head to look around. Doing this reminded of the macabre appearance of the person in front of me. My mind forgot about the sound and stumbled over a more pressing matter, answering before he got angry again. Still, I was indifferent to the death of someone unknown, no matter how much I tried to make it seem otherwise. Any semblance of compassion crushed under my fear of him. It must have been hard for you. I guess it happens. Electricity fills the air the moment I stop talking. The figure moves closer, invading my personal space before scoffing his words out. "It happens. How can you give such a heartless and cruel answer? My sister died, and that is all you have to say?" I'm taken aback, not expecting this kind of reaction. Pointy bones start piercing his clothes from inside and popping out. The sense of having made a mistake grew in my chest. "I am sorry. I didn't mean it like that." He lunged forward but stopped just as quick. In reflex, I jumped back, hitting my head against the wall in a painful thud. A sudden awareness of how fast my heart was beating struck me. Enough. It seems that no one has ever taught you proper manners. I could taste his threats. The ashy stench coming out of him almost made me choke. I felt his cold breath settling down in my exposed neck, like a dirtying smoke. I got paralyzed, and the only thing I could move were my eyeballs, staring back at the old worn-page yellowish skull, noticing a crack that went from the bump of his nose to half an inch under his left eye socket, which seemed to be growing. We both glared at each other. The only thing breaking the silence were my own uneasy breaths. His stillness confused and frightened me. I expected him to move and rip me apart at any moment, yet it wasn't happening. He stood there like a creepy murder toy watching a paranoid child. After the shock dissipated a bit, I managed to look away from him, only to set my sights on something just as terrifying. On the building's corner, from where the earlier step sounds came, there was a man-shaped shadow, entirely black and looking at me while also not moving an inch. I averted my eyes again, only to notice other two similar figures, one behind a column, underneath a light bulb, but still just as somber. The other behind a bush, right in front of the forest. Lastly, my gaze went back to the car, the hearse which the figure stepped out of. The woman-like silhouette had turned and now looked at me. The newfound awareness of the unexpected audience heightened the sense of dread. Every one of them had the eerie ability to emanate sheer judgment, despite not moving or saying anything. It felt like they were able to read my thoughts thoroughly, coming out with the worst possible conclusions about me. A swarm of possible next actions infested my mind. but it felt like every single one was being unanimously disapproved of before they even came to be. Time seemed to have stopped around me. Even the wind showed no signs of movement. As my mind wandered, a sharp, booming voice slashed through the fearful peace. "Don't you know it's rude to focus on other things while talking to someone?" I looked back at the imposing figure in front of me. I felt his anger buzzing in the air. In a sudden movement, his skull started to morph like dough, acquiring stretched, surreal shapes, sometimes becoming a bony ball, sometimes filled with trios of small holes that vaguely resembled screaming faces. I heard more livid words, but the voice didn't seem to come from him anymore, but from my own eardrums instead. I could only watch as the figure moved closer. His skull finally settled in the shape of an elongated horse skull, an inch from touching my nose. In a moment, the wind turned warm and started hitting against my face, stopping for a second, then grazing on my skin again, in and out, in the same rhythm of a person breathing. The voice no longer came from him, the calm and calculative nature of a doctor replacing the previous anger. I felt everything around me dissolving into a lightless abyss, telling me to focus on the thing in front of me. "Allow me to teach you something. The best way to get someone like you back in line is through fear. Fear will make you think twice before speaking. Fear will help you stay quiet when you should. Fear will teach you respect towards those over you. It is quick, effective, and long-lasting." I saw something rustling underneath his robes, moving around on his midsection. "And I know the exact way to put this fear into you. Do not worry, this is for your own good." From the midst of his robes poked out a bone of a finger, and after it, 100 more, some short and chubby, some long and thin, nearly touching the floor. A whole fan of mismatched skeletal scraps opened, each bone pressing and merging with another, each pointy finger bursting out of the agglomerate like leafless branches from the trunk of a tree. As he raised his hand, each part of it seemed autonomous and disharmonic, crushing and snapping each other in half as a buzz of dry crackling reached my ears. Before I noticed it, a few larger fingers were already holding me in place. I used my full strength break free, but to no result. Not a budge. My efforts weren't even enough to get his annoyance. "It will be over soon." As he spoke, a whip-like finger slithered out of the mess and started moving closer. I couldn't contain the shortness on my breath as I saw it aim for my next, behaving like it had a life of its own. When the spiky tip methodically started piercing my skin, I felt a sharp pain on my chest and lost control over my muscles. He didn't let me fall to the ground and instead kept me in place. I was reduced to what my sensitive nerves could feel, the blurred mess my startled eyes could see, and the wordless thoughts my dizzy brain could make. The satisfaction of showing someone their place is like no other. Squirm more for me. Instead of the expected pain, I felt my flesh opening up by itself instead. It read his intentions and obeyed by allowing passage. I could feel the soft bone entering my neck, slowly, pushing my flesh and blood vessels apart like a surgeon on duty, wriggling deeper and deeper inside like a worm burrowing through dirt. My focus was on the bone-chilling sensation of my throat pressing against his bony finger every time I gasped on instinct. The agonizing sensation, similar to having something stuck on my throat, took over me. My body tried to fight by coughing, shaking, sweating, aching, anything to make it stop. Make it stop. In a final display of precision, he wrapped his finger around my spinal cord and gently, oh so gently, pressed down on my nerves. At this point, my organs took over, reacting in a botched soup of liquid emotions, gut-muddying cravings, and autonomous moves, each trying to escape in their own incomprehensible way, revoking my mind's control over them. Despite this, the figure remained a statue, his inability to have facial expressions doing little to stop the satisfaction coming from his words. "I sincerely hope that you have learned your lesson now. We will meet again. I expect more from you then." With that, he pressed his finger a tad harder on my nerves. My body shut down completely in response. I could only see the inners of my eyelids as I got unconscious, my body hitting hard but numbly against the ground. It has been a few hours since this has happened. I barely remember the way back home, only a few quick lapses of memory, of the empty street and my confusion towards the sudden disappearance of the things I saw. When I arrived, I had trouble finding the way around my own place because of a terrible headache. On top of that, the repulsive feeling of having something lodged on my throat still haunts me. I'm having trouble to breathe. Whenever I try to eat or drink something, a tingling sensation accompanied by an urge to vomit overwhelms me. Earlier, while in front of a mirror, I noticed a gray spot on my neck, pulsating at its own rhythm. Nothing I did could take it off, scratching, cleaning, or poking it. I even got the urge to grab a sharp knife and cut it off, regardless of the implied risks. But for now, I'm able to hold myself back. Right now, I'm in front of my computer, more collected than before. All my doors and windows are locked. I'm acting like a paranoid lunatic. I'm not even sure if I'm writing this down or if I'm already asleep, having a cruel dream. I heard his threats of seeing me again, and I will not take them lightly. I'm going to share this story around the internet in hopes that someone will find it and help me with this. I'm scared. I don't know if I'll be able to survive the fated next encounter. So please, help me. I know that I can't do much in return, but I want to live. Tell me what I did wrong, what I should do now. Anything that can help. I'll stay awake through the night. I'm counting on you. Update. I need to write this fast. He's here. The hearse is here, in front of my house. How did he know? I'm scared of what might happen if I don't answer. No more editing. I'm posting the story right now. I'm going downstairs to greet him. I'll try to read any messages that come. I hope I don't mess this up. Wish me luck. If you think the last story was chilling, the next one will make your blood run cold. I survived working at the retirement home. Working at a retirement home was never my dream job, but it paid the bills and gave me something to do while I figured out my next move in life. The job was straightforward: help the residents with their daily routines, keep them company, and make sure they were comfortable. It wasn't the most thrilling job, but it paid the bills. The residents were mostly quiet, reserved people who had lived long lives and were just passing their time peacefully. But last week, I quit my job at the retirement home. You're probably wondering why anyone would walk away from such a stable gig. It's simple. I wanted to stay alive. But even now, I'm not sure if I made it out in time. Let me start. I worked the night shift. It was usually quiet. The residents were asleep by 8 p.m., and the rest of the night was a breeze. Most nights, I'd sit in the monitoring room, watching the security feeds, reading, or scrolling through my phone. That was until the weird stuff started happening. The first incident was subtle. I noticed it about a month into the job. It was around 3 a.m., and I was half asleep in front of the monitors. The cameras were showing their usual views: hallways, common areas, and the residents' rooms. Then I noticed Mrs. Carlson. Mrs. Carlson was 86, frail, with a mind slowly slipping into the fog of dementia. But that night, she wasn't in her bed. She was standing in the corner of her room, facing the wall, just standing there, completely still. I watched her for a while, expecting her to move, shift, or do anything, but she just stood there, like a statue. Uneasy, I decided to check on her. When I got to her room, the door was slightly open. I pushed it wider, and my heart skipped a beat. Mrs. Carlson wasn't in the corner. She was lying in bed, asleep, just as always. I told myself I must have been tired, maybe imagining things, or that the camera had glitched. But the next night, it happened again. As I sat in the monitoring room, exhausted and barely paying attention to the screens, I saw Mr. Hopkins, a former war veteran, long incapacitated, standing in the middle of his room. At first, he was just standing there, facing the camera with the same empty eyes as before. But then, he started to lean backward, slowly and steadily, until his head was nearly touching his back. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. No one his age should be able to bend their body in such an unnatural way. Suddenly, Mr. Hopkins began to move, not with the heavy, labored steps of an elderly man, but with jerky, unnatural movements. He crawled on all fours like a spider, slowly climbing up the wall with precise movements, almost without a sound. I jumped up, my heart pounding in my chest, unable to tear my eyes away from the screen. I knew this frail old man shouldn't be able to perform these kinds of contortions, but there he was, twisting his body in impossible ways, clinging to the walls and ceiling with his hands and feet, moving in a frantic, unnatural manner. Then he stopped. Everything went still, as if time itself had frozen. His distorted body remained motionless, his eyes still locked onto the camera. My instincts kicked in. I knew I had to check on him. I bolted from the monitoring room, racing down the hallways to Mr. Hopkins' room, my mind reeling with what I had just witnessed. But when I burst into his room, ready to face whatever horror awaited me, I found him lying peacefully in bed, asleep, as if nothing had happened. The room was quiet, undisturbed, with no sign that anything out of the ordinary had taken place. It was as if the terrifying scene I had witnessed on the monitor had never occurred. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly wrong, but every time I brought it up with the day staff, they dismissed it. "Old people do strange things," they'd say. "Don't worry about it." But I couldn't help worrying. The incidents became more frequent. More residents would stand motionless in their rooms at night, staring into the cameras. A cold dread washed over me when I realized they weren't just looking at the lens, they were looking straight at me, through the screen, through everything that separated us. It wasn't just standing, either. Some nights, they'd be in positions that were impossible for people their age, standing on one leg, arms outstretched, heads tilted at unnatural angles. They'd stay like that for hours, only to vanish from the screen the moment I decided to check on them. And every time I'd find them peacefully asleep. I started losing sleep myself. I dreaded going to work, but I couldn't quit. I needed the money. So I kept showing up every night, hoping it was all just a weird coincidence, that maybe I was losing my mind. Then one night, things escalated. It was a quiet night, almost too quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl. Around 2:30 a.m., the televisions in the common area started flickering. The static buzzed, filling the halls with a low hum. I stared at the monitor, watching the static swirl on the screens, feeling dread settle in my stomach. The static lasted for about a minute before the televisions went black. And that's when I saw them, on the monitors, in every single room. The residents were all standing by their beds, staring directly into the cameras. Not just a few of them. All of them. I froze. This wasn't dementia or sleepwalking. Something was terribly wrong. Then, the cameras started flickering, the images distorted by static, and when the feed cleared, the residents were gone. Every single one of them had vanished. I jumped out of my chair and bolted down the hallways, my footsteps echoing off the walls. I checked room after room, but they were empty. Beds unmade, personal belongings untouched, but no sign of the residents. My mind was racing. I couldn't understand what was happening. Had they all left? Were they playing some kind of twisted joke? But how could they? Some of them couldn't even walk without assistance. I was about to call the police when I heard it, the faint sound of shuffling, followed by a soft, wet noise like something being dragged across the floor. It was coming from the common area. I hesitated, fear gripping my heart, but I had to know. I walked toward the noise, every step heavier than the last. When I rounded the corner into the common area, I saw them. The residents were all there, standing in a circle, facing away from me. In the center of the circle was Mrs. Carlson, lying on the floor, her eyes wide open, staring blankly at the ceiling. Her mouth was open too, but not in a scream. It was as if something had been pulled from her, leaving her hollow, empty. Before I could react, the residents turned to face me, all at once, their movements synchronized like they were a single entity. Their eyes were black, empty voids, and their faces expressionless. I stumbled back, my heart racing, as they started to move toward me, slow and deliberate. I didn't wait to see what would happen. I turned and ran, my legs barely carrying me fast enough as I made my way to the exit. I didn't stop until I was outside, gasping for breath, the cold night air burning my lungs. I didn't go back inside. I left my keys on the doorstep and drove home, my hands shaking on the wheel. I called the police from my apartment, told them there was a situation at the retirement home. They didn't find anything when they got there. No bodies, no sign of struggle. Just an empty building. The next day, the retirement home closed down, and the residents relocated to other facilities. I didn't bother finding out where. I quit, and I've been trying to forget about it ever since. But I can't. I wish I could tell you that it was all just a story, a product of my imagination, but it's the truth. Even after I quit, the memories still haunt me. I've tried to forget about that night, but sometimes in the quiet moments, I see them, those empty, black eyes staring back at me. I don't know where the residents went or what really happened in that building, but I'm certain of one thing. Whatever it wasn't human. But as one nightmare fades, another begins to stir. Our new student is my kidnapper. Rejuvenated, nobody believes me, although I've never lied about anything. This is worse than being taken from my home by Darnum Stonewell. Yes, he is the same as the new boy in our class, Darren Rockwell. He is a liar and a kidnapper and a warlock. I was Lamb, and I lived in terror, in darkness, in hunger. I thought he was going to kill me, but instead his plans were so much more terrible. I now live in a nightmare, although I have returned to my family and to school. That is why I do not want to go to Mrs. Peachtree's class today. That is why I do not want to go to school. Darren sits behind me, and I can hear him whispering, "I am watching you, Lucy. You are my little lamb, and you are mine. You are always mine, and nobody can take you from me." His power over me is somehow incomplete, because I can see who he is. I know he controls everyone around me, because my teacher and my parents and my friends think he is a perfect little boy, and force me to sit with him whenever and wherever he wants me to sit. They only see a kid who shares his lunch and his smile and is so polite and kind. He is such a liar, so fake. I know he is evil, and I know he is really Darnum Stonewell, Dr. Germain, and also Dane Radcliffe. He is all those people somehow. I would know best how he does it, how he becomes young again, and lives another life, and can disguise himself to be both a student, a soccer coach, and a psychiatrist. They think I am traumatized, and they medicate me. It only makes my head more clear. It only eradicates my emotions and lets me tell my story. I have a dictionary and a friend, in Domo Aria Gato Sans, my cat. A side effect of my medication lets me write like a grown-up, late at night, as long as I keep eating sugar. My head is so lucid and my thumbs quick on the page to find the words. I am not alone. My cat sits with me, and when I cannot express myself, I can hear his thoughts, like he sounds like Morgan Freeman, and I know how to express myself when he says what to say. We'll just call my cat Dags for short, since that is one of his 3 names. His other name is a secret name, and that is known only to me and to him. That way Darnum Stonewell cannot cast a spell on my cat. He needs your name to use his witchcraft on you. It is part of the spell. My father signed me up for soccer, and Dane Radcliffe was our coach. He watched me with the focused gaze of a predator, and I felt his eyes all over my body while I exercised. I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't explain what it was. It was just this dirty and uncomfortable sensation, like someone is watching you. It wasn't until winter, when soccer ended, that my mom, a soccer mom, finally agreed with me that our coach was weird. That's all she said, that he was weird. It took her too long, and it was too little, but for just one moment, I felt safe, like she would listen to me. I'd had premonitions about what his plans were for me, and I told her I needed protection. She laughed and said that our security system at home was sufficient. So, her home was safe from burglary, but I didn't see how that was going to keep me safe. When I kept seeing him outside, watching me, I'd pull back my curtains, half asleep. I'd wake up, answering to his voice, commanding me. There he was, outside, looking at me. He didn't need to come in. I tried to say he was stalking me, but there was no evidence. He was never seen by anyone else. I'd wake up my parents, and after enough false alarms, they stopped believing me. That is when he took me from them. I woke up one night, and he was in our house. He was holding a strange candelabra with sparking green light dripping from the fleshy wax. It smelled of the grave, an earthy and fetid smell. There was this nascent emotion in me, where I could only stare, dreamlike, entranced. His mellifluous grin was one of sadistic victory. He gestured, and I stood in my pajamas. My cat was hiding, unable to protect me. My parents lay scattered where they had responded to his intrusion, falling to the floor as he waved his magic candle at them. It cast no shadows, or it cast a shadow rather than light, this eerie and weird glow. The smell of it was due to its composition of a severed hand, the fingertips burning with the flames of the grave, and its power even worked on the neighborhood security who responded to the alarm call, only to fall asleep amid the sprinklers of our lawn. And then he touched me for the first time, and pain shot through my body. He roughly handled me into his car, into the back seat. He buckled my waist and lay me down back there, telling me to sleep. Then I slept, and when I was awake again, I was in a bedroom, with one of my hands wrapped in tight cushioning and handcuffed to the iron bed frame. He'd undressed me and changed me into a diaper and nightgown. Dharmam entered the room and looked at me with satisfaction. "Lamb, you are. Lucy waits. You will obey me. This is a feel, and you will choose to imbibe it, and in 13 days and nights you will consist the sacrifice. One death brings new life. I am grateful to have found a pure maiden who has never told a lie. You are exceptionally rare these days. Some men think that all women lie, but I know better. Bless you and keep you in his grace, my dear, and you shall be cleansed." I lie all the time. I tried to tell a lie, hoping it would ruin his spell. I was unable to speak. My words went into a silence, and he smiled, his trickery absolute. "In my home, you will obey my rules. You will not speak. You cannot lie," Dharmam Stonewell informed me. He made a gesture, and an old book appeared in his hand. The title was Kalendor, and it was someone's diary. Even a wise and ancient warlock needed a guide. He read something from it, and then closed the book again, and it vanished into his wizardly robes. "I recognize you. You're my soccer coach." I tried to say. He nodded as though he could read my mind. "You know me, but it won't give you power over me. Nobody else has ever recognized me. It means nothing to be recognized." He shrugged, but I sensed he had a doubt. He wasn't sure how I knew he was the same person. Perhaps it was my purity. Perhaps I was too pure. Liars beget liars. I don't even lie to myself, I claimed. This seemed to bother him, as though he could still hear me, although I was muted. He shrugged and left me there. For nearly 2 weeks, he kept me his prisoner, attached to the bed. He changed my diaper, and he put a leash and collar on me, and took me to an old iron bath, and washed me in salts and oils, cleansing me. He cast spells that sounded like prayers over me, and I was subdued. I couldn't resist him. I felt like I had to do what he wanted. Every day he seemed to wither and grow weaker, until the 13th sunrise and sunset, the final day of my terrifying ordeal. I was truly frightened, as I believed he was going to sacrifice me. I thought the wavy knife he kept, his athame, was meant to slaughter me in the chamber he had prepared in his basement. I shook with fear, completely under his power, but filled with dread. I wore a white dress, and he showed me to myself in a mirror ringed in black wood, carved and embedded with white silver. I looked different, angelic, and for a moment I admired my reflection. I did look very beautiful. On my head he placed a crown made of braided daisies which he had carefully woven. "This will protect you, and nothing in that chamber will be able to claim you. You must remain pure, or my work will be undone. You must not utter, you must not falter, and your innocence must be guarded. Without your surgery, I might not be restored." He spoke strangely, almost protectively about me. I was still afraid, and I still thought he was going to kill me. No, his plans were far more terrifying, for he planned to leave me alive, and in a kind of hell, a nightmare, a prisoner of his terror forever. So much worse than death, for death would have set me free of his power over me. Death would be the end, but it just goes on and on. I cannot recall what happened in that chamber, but my raven hair grew brittle and white at what I saw. Demons danced in the shadows, summoned to his resurrection. It was a cruel ritual, and I was the priestess of the abomination. I became his executioner and his midwife, all with the knife and the way. I knew the way, it was his way, and I moved to the rhythm, merely a component of his spell. It is love that binds us. My teacher wrote that I would recognize her for her honesty. He said nothing about she who would recognize me. I must be under your power for the final day of this life, and you will bring me into the next. Our fate is now intertwined. I must belong to you, or else you do not belong to me. Love is a chain, fate, and the place where our souls touch. That is what you must choose to do. If your will is violated, I cannot come forth. Leave me not in the darkness. Recognize me and know my name here in this darkness," he said as he sipped the phial. He handed it to me, and I drank the rest, unsure if I chose to do so or not. Then it was he who lay upon the altar. "I am ready," he breathed, trembling. I lifted the knife, and somehow there was no blood as I opened him up. Instead, the darkened chamber filled with light. Then there was a void beyond. It was in front of me, and all around me, and within me. The light coming out of him was in me and fading. I felt its pain and its terror slipping into the darkness beyond. Despite what he had done to me, I felt sorry for him, seeing where he was going. I pitied his fading light as it descended. It clung to me like a newborn, helpless. I watched as he began to fall away from me, and I saw how he was part of me, and I a part of him. It pained me to know that if I did nothing, he would be lost forever in that eternal shadow, and he would cease to be. Although I was shaking with fear, and although I have only a vague memory of how and why I did what I did, I reached out, with my mind, my heart, my soul. Whatever part of me reached for him, it was my own will. In that moment, his spell over me was broken, and I was free. I could have let him descend into that abyss. I could have let him go. Something in me did not wish that. It felt evil to let him go there, like what was beyond, those hungry dancing demons who had celebrated before his fall, like I would be feeding him to them. It felt wrong, like casting a baby into the flames. For 13 days he had eaten nothing, only drinking water. His body was purified. For 13 nights he had slept in wrappings so that he could not move, and only at the light of dawn did these bindings fall away. His heart was purified. For 13 baths he had cleansed me in a sacred pool, and made me whole so that I could not hate him. His soul was purified. He had explained this to me, and in my fear of him I had not understood. I reached for him, with my willpower, with my love, like a mother's love. I pulled his soul from the shadow and set it neatly where his body lay restored, youthful, a heart cleansed, beating yet again. There I left him, taking off the flowery crown as I climbed the stairs. I unlocked the front door and went outside, finding the warm sun on my face, my tears of relief, only a moment of freedom. I didn't know that the horror of my world had only just begun. He would never let me go, and I had made him powerful again, all his charm and abilities restored to full. He lets nothing go. I would tell foul lies, I would speak curses, but I cannot. I am the opposite of him, and I am in fear of becoming his entirely. As long as I remain unlike him, as long as I am the truth, he cannot get any closer, cannot follow me into the next life. For I know the way, and I shall live again. If you thought that was unsettling, just wait until you hear this next tale. I have no hope. I'm not exactly sure where to start, and I truly hate to bore you with stories of my upbringing, but I suppose that may give some context as to what made me into the monster I am today. I could tell you my father was a drug addict who left for an 8-ball when I was 4 and never came back. I could tell you my mother was absent through my childhood. I could tell you about the first love of my life who constantly rejected me. I could also tell you about all of the friends I had through my adolescence that I won over with parties and substances. I could tell you about my addictions, my broken body, a life-altering surgery, and all of my heartbreaks and rejections. But I don't think any of that explains why I am the way I am, at least not entirely. See, this isn't your average scary story that you tell in the dark. There are no monsters out for blood, no secret government projects. No. This is something personal. This is about inner demons and the God that was never on your side. If you're expecting an epic story or a happy ending, this isn't it. I don't think. I struggled through my late teens and early 20s. Alcohol addiction was very present in my life back then. I know I used substances to cope with loneliness and a feeling of failing in life. I was unlucky enough to grow up in the social media generation, where I got to constantly see how wonderful everyone else's life was. While I never paid much attention to it, it was still a nagging feeling in the back of my mind that I wasn't good enough, or I couldn't have those things, those dreams that everyone else seemed to have or be experiencing. For a brief period in my early 20s, I did find some solace. I had a decent job, and I found what at the time I thought was the love of my life. We lived together in a crappy apartment, and for the most part, things were good. We were together for about a year, and while things weren't exactly perfect, I do recall feeling some sense of happiness and fulfillment. At about the year mark, we found out we were pregnant. While we weren't exactly financially stable, we ultimately decided that we were getting jump start on the rest of our lives together, and this pregnancy was a blessing. A few weeks passed since we found out about the pregnancy, and then it happened. On a Sunday evening, on the tail end of the spring season, We decided we'd go for a walk through the neighborhood and enjoy some sunlight and fresh air. As we were leaving out the back door in the kitchen, I stopped for a moment, realizing the trash was full, and thought it'd be a good idea to grab it and take it out. She left out the back door and said, "I'll see you in the alley." I was only 20, maybe 30 seconds behind her when I made my out, and I walked into the most terrifying thing that I had seen in my life. A homeless man had a knife to her throat. I wasn't sure if he was trying to rob or rape her, but I reacted in that moment as many men would. The bag of trash slipped through my fingers, and before I knew it, I was on top of the man, having shoved my girlfriend to the side. She escaped unscathed, thankfully. I, however, did not. I was stabbed. The blade made direct contact with one of my ribs. I got a few other minor cuts as well, but nothing detrimental. With the adrenaline pumping, I hadn't even noticed the damage I sustained, and I didn't realize the damage I was causing either. I repeatedly slammed this man's head into the concrete. In no time at all, first responders were on the scene. The man was hauled away to the hospital, as was I. I got some stitches and was let go free and clear. That man, however, will spend the rest of his days drooling on himself in a mental facility, which in my opinion was well-deserved. So all was well in the world, right? A nice neat bow was put on the action hero's story, and we walked away happily and more in love than ever, right? Here's the thing. All of those action movies that show the hero walking away happily with their girl in tow are a complete lie. She was terrified and stressed over what had happened, so much so that her doctor believes that's what caused the miscarriage. I had constant nightmares that haunted me for years after that encounter as well. Things were so bad for her mentally speaking. She didn't feel safe, even in our apartment. When I'd leave for work, my best friend who worked from home would come over and be there with her. What I didn't expect was to come home early from work a few months after the incident and find my best friend in bed with the love of my life. Of course, after that discovery, I kicked her out. She moved in with my best friend and eventually married him. They now have 3 kids together and live what seems to be a peaceful and happy life in the suburbs of Boulder, CO. So anyways, I sat there for months, lonely, drunk, upset, and a touch suicidal. Every day was a waking nightmare that I couldn't escape from, and on the few occasions I could sleep, all I dreamed about was the day I smashed that fella's head into the concrete repeatedly. After a good couple months of suffering, I quit my job, moved out, and decided it was time for me to get my life back on track. And the first step to that was going to rehab and getting some therapy. After a month of inpatient treatment, I was back out in the world. I moved in with my mom and stepdad, found a crappy temp entry-level job, bought a crappy car, and attended AA meetings every day. The next few years of my life were pretty quiet. I stayed on the grind, kept to myself, and stayed sober and paid off my debts. Eventually, I caught some raises, made a name for myself professionally, and even got a motorcycle. Life had been tough up to this point, but I felt like I was finally making some positive strides financially. The only downside to this self-improvement grind was I lost the small handful of friends I had left due to my lifestyle changes, and I was extremely lonely. In the midst of all of that, though, something which at the time I thought was good happened. I never really knew my family past my grandparents on my mom's side, but around the 2-year mark of my sobriety, my mom started to get in touch with distant relatives, cousins, aunts, and such. In that time, my mom discovered her cousin's daughter, who was fresh out of college, was looking for work. So my mom asked me if I could help her find a job with me. In no time at all, I was conversing with my second cousin, who I'd never known, and I was able to get her an interview with my place of business. I really wanted to be sure she would succeed, so I met up with her the day before her interview at a coffee shop to talk about the role, the team, the work, and how to say the right things and get hired. Now, I know a lot of you won't understand this, and I'm likely going to catch a lot of shit for the things I'm about to say, but bear with me, it's an important part of the story. I walked into the coffee shop and I saw my second cousin, and admittedly, I was awestruck. She was hands down the most beautiful woman had seen at that point in my life. We really hit it off that night. We talked for hours, and there was a lot of smiling and laughter. On my way home that evening, she texted me and said it was wonderful to meet and thanked me for everything and said that she was happy that I came into her life. The very next day, she was hired and we struck up a beautiful friendship. She sat next to me in the office. We talked all day, and I helped her move quickly through the basics and got her more involved with bigger and more difficult tasks. I was able to put her into hyperspeed and get her everything I had going for me, raises and promotions, in a fraction of the time it took me. We went out every day after work. Sometimes we'd take a stroll through the nearby park and talk for hours, or we'd get some ice cream or bite to eat. And eventually, the unthinkable happened. I realized I was falling for my second cousin. For obvious reasons, that didn't sit well with me, and against my better judgment, I decided I needed to tell her how I was feeling. So one day after work, after sitting on it for a while, we got shakes and headed to the park, where I told her how I felt about her. To my surprise, she felt the same. However, she thought it was weird. It wouldn't work, and of course she had a boyfriend. At that time, we agreed to stay cousins, friends, and to never speak of this to anyone. Things were all well and good for a little while. We remained very close, and she actually encouraged me to get out there and start dating again. After a handful of terrible first dates, I found a woman who wanted to keep seeing me, and that I wanted to keep seeing. I was with her for a few weeks, and things were great, until life got complicated. I was still very tight with my cousin, and she started to get jealous. I was doing things with this new girl that we had planned on doing together, and our friendship began to grow into something toxic. Me, not being one to keep my mouth shut and trying to hang on to the one friend I had, called my cousin out on the jealousy. And then it happened. Without thinking of the potential outcomes, I called her out by text. Half an hour went by before I finally got the response I desperately wanted deep down. She admitted she was in love with me, and if I was willing to give it a shot against all the odds, she would take that leap with me. We hung on to our respective partners to keep up a facade. We would each see our partners one day a week and go on an arbitrary date, never doing more than kissing them. The rest of the week, her and I would spend every waking moment together. It was blissful, fun, romantic, sexy as could be, and all around beautiful. After a month or so of keeping up our facades, we decided it was time to cut our respective partners loose. As far as our families would know, her and I were both just single and friends. That was the plan. So I cut my girlfriend loose on a Monday afternoon. I came to pick up my cousin feeling fresh, recharged, and happy that we were doing this. However, a few days later, she determined it was in her best interest to stay with her partner and let me go. This was a huge kick to the nuts for me. I let a good girl go for someone that was wrong for me in every possible way. I think the worst part of it was in the process, I lost my only friend, and obviously, this wasn't something I could talk to anyone about either. So I wallowed in pain and misery again, had a few drinks, and broke my sobriety. We professionally and personally went our separate ways, and in a few months' time, I was back to myself again. Thankfully, things never slipped for me professionally. I caught a couple promotions along the way, upgraded my car and my motorcycle, and life was feeling pretty darn good. Heck, I even managed to make a few friends along the way as well. I mean, I was still in pain over what happened, but every day, things felt better and better. I even got back out there again and started dating. This time, things were a little more difficult. I went through what I swear was hundreds of first dates before I finally found the right girl. I stuck with this girl for about 8 months before I realized I wasn't really in love with her. I just simply wanted to be. I knew it wasn't right to keep this girl hanging on. So I did the right thing and I broke it off. Things kept going really well for me professionally, and after a grueling 5 years, I had no debt, I owned my car and motorcycle outright, I had money in the bank, to the point where I could get a mortgage and finally move out of my parents' house. I even had a good group of friends from work. Then the beginning of the end started. And it started with a gal who was my direct report. I never thought much of this gal when I hired her, and even for her first few months, I never gave her any thought. Then we started working late together, not just her and I, but the whole team, of course. I started to notice that we clicked very well, and while she wasn't the prettiest girl in the room at first, to me, she slowly became the prettiest in the room. Things got heated between her and I pretty quickly, and we found ourselves on a first date, and then a second, etc. It was a really nice relationship, and she was a great person. After about a month of quietly dating, we took a week-long vacation together in my little slice of paradise. This was actually the first vacation I took since I was a child, so it was big for me. I felt like I found the right girl, professionally and financially. Life was on track, and I had a good group of friends and a mentor that had my back. And that's where I was terribly wrong. It was in that moment, sitting on the beach, smoking a cigar, listening to music, with my gal by my side, a cold beer with a lime in it, in my hand, that I felt like I was king of the world. I felt like I finally made it in this thing called life. We returned to work on a Monday, and when I walked in, I could feel every set of eyes in the office on me. And let me tell you, it was a massive office. I instantly knew something was wrong. The folks I said good morning to in passing didn't even look at me. It was about 30 minutes into my day when a managing director came over to my desk and asked me to step into their office. Now, I think you might suspect the office rumor mill had spread the stories of my love life, but as it turns out, that wasn't the case. My longtime boss and mentor had screwed up a relationship with a longtime $500 million customer of mine while I was out on vacation. Rather than accepting the blame for something she dropped the ball on, she pinned the blame on me, and I never got the opportunity to defend myself. The consequences of her actions were letting me go. I thought to myself that first week or two, I still have some money in the bank, my credit is great, I have no bills, and I've got a place to crash, plus I've still got an awesome girlfriend. I also really made a name for myself in my industry. I will get through this and be okay. I was so incredibly wrong about that. The first thing that went wrong for me, about 2 weeks after being let go, was finding out that my girlfriend had a terminal sickness that would take her life shortly. We fought the good fight together and promised we'd stick it out to the bitter end. And she didn't. We stayed together another few months, and she broke up with me on New Year's Day. I like to joke that I was a New Year's resolution. I found out about a month later that she had passed away. The other problem at that time was no matter how hard I tried and how many applications I put in, I was never able to gain any traction with finding work. I didn't start working again until the time she had passed away. So over 4 months. In that time, we were still together. I also started lying to her. I told her I had plenty of money and that I was getting a massive wrongful termination settlement. And in truth, there was no wrongful termination. My boss mentor covered her ass beautifully. I spent every last nickel I had on treatments for her and medical bills. I destroyed myself financially trying to hang on to her and whatever moments we could have together until she decided to leave me. Unfortunately, the lines of reality started to blur. I started feeding my friends and family the same lies, that I was getting a settlement and that I found work when I hadn't. I found in that time that it was easier to have everyone believe the same lies than try to lie to one person and constantly cover your tracks with them. Towards the end of January, I finally found work. It was a far cry from what I used to do, and I certainly didn't want to make a career out of this newfound job, but it paid well, and I needed that badly. I suppose it's a good thing, though, that I didn't dream of making a career of that job, though, because it didn't last more than 2 months. I was deemed to not be a culture fit. I refused to go to church with the owner of the business, and that made me not a culture fit. So there I was, struggling once again. I made all of these big promises to the handful of folks left in my life that I was getting a big settlement, and I continued to tell my parents I was working when I wasn't. God took my girl from me as well, and I was still a mess over that. I had maxed out all of my credit cards. I only had a few $100 left in the bank. And when I was driving home one night from a friend's, I hit a beaver. My car was drivable, but man, was it jacked up. I couldn't afford to fix it either. I mean, who hits a beaver? Incredible luck, right? Right as I got down to my last few dollars, one of the thousands of applications I submitted got back to me and scheduled an interview. This was the first bit of hope I had felt in quite some time. They ended up offering me a good-paying job that I graciously accepted. However, I was in a dismal place financially, so I decided to sell my car and buy a beater and use the difference to live until my start date. Time came and went, and a month later, I was drained again. But at least I started working. Now I realized just because I had a job that doesn't mean I was financially stable. And I was still lying to everyone in my life about my financial situation. My plan was to grind it out like I did before, work on repairing my credit, save some money, and get life back on track. I knew eventually I'd have to come clean to my parents as well, but I didn't want to do that until I was in a better spot financially. As you can tell though, life for me has a funny way of going off the rails. The day I got my first paycheck was the day I met my current girlfriend. So, I'm not exactly sure where to take it from here. I suppose I'll just say, let me welcome you to the last 4 months of my life. I guess I'll start by saying, this girl, she's not like anyone I've met before. She's incredible, head to toe, inside and out. I mean, if there ever was a perfect woman for me, she is it. I've had some great ones in the past, but they pale in comparison to her. Sorry, ex that passed away. She's a little older than I am, and she has a toddler who I love as if he were my own. She inspires me to be a better person. Which I suppose is why I'm here today telling you the whole ugly truth of the monster I've become over the years. Outside of how I feel about this woman, I should say she's in the midst of a messy divorce, and financially she's going through a tough time. I caught on to that fairly quickly and started floating her some cash and ignoring my creditors. I also saw she was in a hopeless place as a whole, and this is where things started going wrong. I never had to lie to her and repeat the same shit I've been telling others for the past year, but I did. I gave this woman false hope, and she loved me for it. I think the reason I've lied to her is because of a fear of rejection. I was afraid if she knew what I was going through, she wouldn't want to deal with that on top of her own issues. So I lied to her and told her I'd be there for her, that I would make everything okay, and that we'd take on the world together. When I said all of that, I truly meant it. I didn't quite care about what would happen to me financially as long as she made it through. I said all of that while I had a job too. However, after about a month of us being together, life fell apart for me again. The company I was working for lost a large client and they could no longer afford me and decided to let me go. My credit was still jacked up, maxed out cards, creditors calling every hour, etc. But at least I had cash coming in. As if things couldn't get worse, my parents kicked me out that same day I lost my job. They found out I had been drinking occasionally and they felt betrayed by that. I've been responsible and I'm far from being an alcoholic these days. I know that sounds like probable BS, but I promise you it's not. I was left with no choice but to sell my beater car. I also ended up selling my motorcycle as well. I currently have negative $20 in my bank account. All of my cards are maxed. I haven't been able to find work in months. And I let my girlfriend believe I have money to spare, that we could buy a house, get married, and that I have a new car, which she hasn't seen yet. I'm back to living with my parents, but they don't know the full truth. They think right now, as I'm writing this in my room, that I'm really working remotely. They also bought my faked documents, stating that I do have my first payout from my wrongful termination coming in at the end of the month, and it's supposed to be substantial. My girlfriend is starting to not believe my lies. She's seeing I'm less and less reliable, and it's caused a significant rift in our relationship. I know when I go to see her, if I can even manage to find a way there, if I don't show up with that car, it's likely going to be over. I also know when my parents find out how broke I really am, and that I've been lying this whole time to them, they'll likely kick me out. I wanted this story to get out there before it's too late for me to tell it. In my opinion, as I'm sitting here writing this, the real monsters in this world are us. Average, everyday humans who get beaten down, backed into a corner, and who sometimes make wrong decisions or bad choices out of love, longing, loneliness, or loss. While I partially consider myself to be a human monster for my actions through the years, I don't think God or Creator, or however you want to refer to the universal existence, should escape without blame. I never wanted any of this. All I've wanted in my life is to feel loved and to give that love back, to live a simple life. I've tried to find myself, do the right things. I've tried to love, and I've tried to be on the receiving end of love, and have failed miserably every time. Rather than looking out for your humans, you let them suffer, let things outside of their control, but possibly in yours, destroy them repeatedly. You say sin is part of our freedom of choice, but why do you take away all of our options other than sin? I'm not without fault here, but God, you sure as shit aren't either. The last hope I have to save this relationship and have a life worth living is a lottery ticket for tonight's drawing. I'm certain that last fractional bit of hope won't pan out, but you know what? Prove me wrong, God. As someone who's become a pathological liar in the past year, that thing that was always coming but never arrived, tomorrow. Tomorrow is arriving, it's knocking on the door, and the only one here to answer it is me. God ain't by my side, never has been, nor is anyone else. I see myself clearly for the first time in my whole life. I was never God's warrior or chosen son. I'm just another lost soul doomed to suffer without getting a second glance. So there it is, the whole ugly truth. All of the wrongs I've done and all of the wrongs done to me. There may not be a scary, bloodthirsty monster involved in this story or some great conspiracy, but it is dark, it is twisted, and out of all the stories out there, I assure you it's the most real and least hopeful story you'll hear today. Wish me luck. Some stories linger in the shadows, while others are yet to be told. The Whisper Beneath the Ghats. After traveling for almost 800 kilometers from Delhi, I reached the religious capital of India, the city of Varanasi. There's a century-old story that once Ma Parvati, wife of the deity Shiva, lost a bangle in the river Ganges. Unable to find it, she cursed the Manikarnika Ghat on the banks of Ganges with everlasting death pyres. It is said that since then, this particular Ghat was under the influence of a strong curse that brings misfortunes to those who interfere with the sacred rites. I could instantly feel a heaviness in my throat and the weight of century-old rituals in this city. It was the last day of Shivratri, a Hindu festival celebrated in the honor of Lord Shiva, and the streets were bustling with devotees. The chants of Har Har Mahadev and the smell of burning incense and flickering pot lamps made the city felt alive. Making my way through some old alleyways and crowded roads, I finally reached the sacred river of Ganges. The riverfront steps, the ghats, were lined with pilgrims offering prayers to Lord Shiva. The river came alive with floating diyas and people traveling in old wooden boats. At some distance, I could see pyres, hundreds of them being prepared as the final resting place for hundreds of bodies, and some of them were burning. Despite all the celebrations, the sight of the pyres unsettled me as I moved through the crowd. A strange undercurrent, a brief tension filled the air as I moved closer to the Manikarnika Ghat. Finding solace from the noise of the city, I decided to sit and spend some time on the very edge of the Manikarnika Ghat. Introspecting as I looked at the burning pyre, I couldn't help but feel the weight of mortality pressing down upon me. The river lapped softly at the shore, and it stretched out before me, silent and empty. That's when it happened. A faint, silent, almost incomprehensible rise and fall of the steps beneath me, as if the stairs breathed. A cold breeze gushed against my face. I paused looking at the burning pyre and turned sharply to look at the dark, mist-shrouded river. Where did all the floating diyas go? I quickly looked at my phone, and it was 3:03 a.m. in the morning. Just how long was I sitting there? This felt wrong. Very wrong. I had no sense of time for the past 7 hours. How was this possible? Just as I was questioning my thoughts, it happened again. The stones shifted as if they had a pulse, like lungs taking in shallow breaths. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and for the first time I noticed it, the whispers, the faint whispers in the air. At first it sounded like the rustling of the river, but as I listened longer, they became more tangible, as if the river itself was speaking to me. The words felt ancient, incomprehensible, yet they filled a deep, primal fear within me, a fear that the very earth beneath me was alive. I quickly stood up to leave the place, but the stones beneath my feet rippled fanatically. the whispers became a deafening chorus. My legs froze in place against my will, and my body trembled as the air grew thick with an unnatural force. In the distance, from the depths of the river, I caught a glimpse of it. Its eyes that didn't belong to this world. Its shape so vast, so incomprehensible that my mind refused to register its form. Its presence felt ancient, as if it existed before the river, the city. My vision blurred, darkness creeping in at the edges as the whispers wrapped my throat, suffocating me. My mind flashed back to the smoke from the burning pyre, twisting and rising into the night sky like a soul being torn from this world. It haunted me now, the fleeting nature of it, the vanishing into the void. I realized with a sickening clarity that this was how my life was going to end, like smoke disappearing into nothingness. I accepted my fate just as the stones beneath me shuddered again when something unexpected happened. The air cackled with energy behind me as if something far more older, protective was behind me. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. The eyes in the water flickered with what I could only describe as fear, and in a moment, everything was gone. Whatever had saved me was gone. Whatever was beneath the gaths disappeared. I collapsed to the ground, no longer feeling the weight of the darkness or the suffocation of whispers around my throat. I quickly ascended the steps, running back to the streets with my heart pounding in my chest, my body drenched in cold sweat. The Manikarnika Ghat was behind me now, but the unease lingered. Even now, as I sit here, writing this, the memories of the smoke, the eyes, the divine intervention continues to haunt me. Just when you think it's over, the darkness whispers another secret. High school dance macabre. I well remember Lucas Murphy, the strange kid in school. I too remember the homecoming of '94, when Lucas surprised us all and brought Rachel Bennett, the most popular girl in school, as his date. I am confident that everyone who was there that night remembers the event with the utmost clarity. I believe it was around the second grade when he moved from Missouri to live with his aunt and grandmother. They lived in a mostly dilapidated house just outside of town. Prior to Lucas moving in, when the school bus would pass that house, I could not seem to be able to take my eyes off of it. Something about it concurrently frightened and fascinated me. Perhaps it had something to do with how it was so close to the cemetery that fueled my youthful imagination the way that it did. When the bus started to make frequent stops to pick up Lucas there, I thought that maybe the house would lose some of its intrigue. Somehow, it never did. In the early days of school, Lucas's carrot orange hair, near albinol complexion, along with his gangly arms and legs, were enough to make him the target of other children's taunting. To exacerbate this situation further, Lucas started getting whiskers in the 4th grade, and by junior high he had a full Amish-style beard. This earned him the nickname Goat Boy among the students. But it was not only his physical features that made him an outcast among us, his peers. Lucas' behavior was always off. He rarely spoke to the rest of us, but when he did engage in conversation, he did so with morbid stories, wild exaggerations, or blatant lies. One such tale gained him quite a bit of notoriety and ridicule when he told Mrs. Adams, our 5th grade teacher, that his great-grandmother escaped Salem just before the infamous witch trials. After Mrs. Adams kindly informed him that those trials occurred in the late 17th century, Lucas leaned back in his desk chair, smiled coyly, and rejoined, "My great-grandma is pretty old." Looking back, it unnerves me to think about how he spoke of her in the present tense. Although he was odd and mostly shunned by everyone, Lucas was very rarely the target of physical bullying. I can remember only one such occasion that occurred during his freshman year of high school. While in the hallway and between classes, Trent Noren pushed Lucas from behind. He shoved Lucas with enough force to knock him to the floor. Trent was a senior and probably twice the size of Lucas. Trent's echoing scream of "freak" had brought the bustling hallway of students to a complete halt, and everyone watched in eager anticipation of what was about to happen next. The experience ended rather anticlimactically, however, as Lucas merely picked himself up, gathered his books, and moved on to his next class. But like dry leaves caught in a gust of wind, the rumors began to swirl about in the hallways and classrooms of our small high school after what happened that very evening. Trent was on a date that night. and he ended up smashing his '89 Firebird into a telephone pole. Trent was paralyzed after the accident. His passenger didn't make it. Hydroplaning was the official explanation, but many started to question whether or not Lucas was truly the descendant of witches. Hereafter, the students were content keeping their taunts as whispered rumors and sniggers behind Lucas's back. Throughout junior high and his freshman year of high school, Lucas was never seen at a school dance, or any other school event for that matter. But in September of 1994, Lucas was a sophomore, and homecoming was just around the corner. I'm not sure why he approached me of all people. Perhaps it was because I treated him with a measure of decency when compared to most others. About 1 week before the dance, Lucas asked me whether or not he should rent a tuxedo for the occasion. I explained that most of us would just be wearing a nice shirt and dress pants, and that maybe a few others would feel inclined to wear a tie. Then, in my curiosity, I asked him if he was planning on bringing anyone. I recall vividly the feeling of discomfort and shocked disbelief I felt at hearing him answer, "Rachel Bennett." "I've already asked her, and she said yes," he told me. I, for my part, said nothing in reply. I merely walked away from him and shook my head. Being a callow youth, I felt compelled to share the conversation I had with Lucas with one of my friends just before class began. Although I acted as though I found the conversation ridiculous, in truth, I was inwardly repulsed, if not a little concerned about Lucas's mental state. By second period, the entire school was aware of what Lucas said. Some who were well acquainted with Lucas's propensity for fabricating stories merely rolled their eyes as they passed him in the hallways. But most were sickened to the core by what they heard. They cast him hateful looks or called him disgusting names. But he said nothing in return, nor made any defense for himself. He only grinned a sheepish, yet unsettling grin. The rest of the week passed like that. Lucas would find anonymous notes left on his locker. Most consisted of one-word insults, freak, or pervert. Others were far too lengthy for me to have properly observed while passing by his locker in the hall. Throughout all of this, however, Lucas seemed unfazed and even almost cheery. The night of the dance saw nearly every student there, despite the tempestuous thunderstorm that raged outside. But Lucas had not yet shown. The hour was late, and the dance was nearly over when a commotion came from behind the gymnasium doors that was even heard above the blaring music. Not everyone at once saw Lucas proudly enter the gym with Rachel by his side. Chaperones and students alike gasped in disbelief as Lucas and his date walked out onto the dance floor. Soon the music stopped, and only an unnatural silence filled the room like something palpable. Then came the cacophony of panicked screams and manic chatter. I felt the world that I knew only seconds before shatter like crystal as I watched Lucas and Rachel in the gymnasium, hand in hand that night. There was no denying that it was Rachel, despite the fact that she was Trent's date the night of his horrible crash. All of this I was seeing, although I, along with nearly the rest of the school, were present at her funeral in the small cemetery just outside of town, by Lucas Murphy's house. My mind had not yet fully comprehended the horror that my eyes beheld, and I could do nothing but stare incredulously as Rachel, who was wearing the same dress that she was buried in, placed her head on Lucas's shoulder and swayed rhythmically to the screams of both students and the faculty.